And welcome back, fellow football fanatics, to another episode of College Football with Sam. How are you all doing? And thank you for coming in. And it was quite the eventful college football playoff. Quite the rankings reveal. But we did a reaction to that in a video yesterday. We also reacted to Notre Dame opting out of their bowl season. Today, what I want to do is give an early preview of some of the more interesting first round games. We do not care about James Madison versus Oregon, nor do we care about Tulane versus Ole Miss. We'll do previews for those, but later in the week. I want to give like early look aheads to the games that have spreads that are within a touchdown and not spreads that are bordering on three scores, as Ole Miss Tulane is and Oregon versus James Madison is. But how are you guys doing? And let me know down in the comments section in the live chat what you thought of the committee's decision to leave Notre Dame out. What did you think of Notre Dame's decision to not participate in the postseason? And what do you think of the bracket? Who do you think is the easiest draw? Who do you think is the toughest draw? And who do you like to win the national championship? One thing that I'm shocked by when you look at these ESPN, make your bracket picks and you get to see what the public thinks, the public is overwhelmingly on three teams, which might be wisdom of the crowd because usually in college football, at the end of it all, you only have like three or maybe four teams at most that actually have a chance at winning it all. There are some years which are the exception to the rule. Some of those years are pretty strong years. Other of those years are really weak and there isn't much in between. But on an average basis, only 1 to 4 teams or maybe 2 to 4 teams in any given year can win it all. And what I think is, so interesting is how the public, they love Oregon. Or no, they don't love Oregon. My apologies. They like Indiana, Ohio State, and Georgia. That is what they're focused on. If you look on the homepage for the make your own bracket picks, 29.3% of people are picking Ohio State as the champion. 26.9% are picking Georgia, and 23.8% are picking Indiana. The only other team above 5% is Texas Tech at 6.3%. Oregon, Alabama, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Miami, and Ole Miss are all under 4% in public brackets picked. And obviously James Madison and Tulane aren't going to win it all. Those are teams that are actually incapable of winning the whole thing. Now, I would say Ole Miss is, and maybe like 2 or 3 other teams in the bracket. There's just no world I could see them winning it all, even if they break some previous college football rules. But I am a little bit surprised that there isn't more love for Texas Tech or for Oregon. Maybe I'm misguided there, but that did shock me just a little bit. Thank you to SFS Inverted, Andrew Mueller for being moderators and making sure this chat is awesome and this place is awesome. I really appreciate you guys. And just looking at, I don't know. It's a playoff that is honestly kind of disappointing. Last year, I thought that the matchups on paper could be more exciting in the first round. Now, obviously, 2 of the quarterfinals, at least we thought were going to be duds. Arizona State and Texas ended up being entertaining. Penn State, Boise State really wasn't entertaining. This year, the quarterfinals will be better. The semifinals and national championship, I also expect to be fairly competitive. So it's just an interesting observation that I had. But I want to get started by talking about some of the first round games, just 2 of them. Oklahoma, Alabama, and also we will discuss Miami versus Texas A&M. Those are the games that I want to start off talking about. So let's do that and discuss these early previews, and then we have my official bracket prediction and so many more things to get to tonight. Make sure, if you haven't already, to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. I would very much appreciate if you did those things. It helps out the channel, helps out me, and also helps out you so you get notified when I go live or release content. That felt really good. Okay, time to talk about what I think is going to be the best first round game in terms of quality of teams facing each other, in terms of matchups, and in terms of a first round game that actually features probably two teams that maybe, if some crazy things happen, could win it all, because I don't think Oklahoma can win it all. I think they can win a game, maybe two. I'm just going to go with one for now, though. I don't know if they could score on Indiana, but they could certainly beat Alabama. Either A&M or Miami, though, if a lot of things break right for them, potentially could go further. And that's mostly just because I think Oklahoma is probably one of the worst teams in the playoff, at least as currently constructed. I mean, that offense is rough, to be honest. Texas A&M opens up the first round as a 3.5-point favorite over the Miami Hurricanes, gotten over the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. 10th ranked Miami, sitting at 10-2, the ACC at-large representative in the college football playoff, travels to Kyle Field to face 7th ranked A&M, stands at 11-1, and the Aggies are favored by 3.5 points. This is the first college football playoff that either school is participating in. Texas A&M has not participated in any type of national championship or college football playoff setting since the 1990s, if not before that. Miami hasn't participated in anything like this since 2002. So this is historic for both of these programs, who have been on really a long hiatus from greatness, and now they have an opportunity to advance to the quarterfinals and play one of the best teams in America in Ohio State. And if they can somehow beat the Buckeyes, they can maybe advance on to bigger and better things. But they need to win this game first. And there are some key things that I'm paying attention to here. Most notably, we're only going to look on the on-field product. We know that A&M has home field advantage. We know that with a one-year sample, all the home teams in the college football playoff won. Big part of that was because Penn State was better than SMU. Ohio State was better than Tennessee. Texas is better than Clemson. And Notre Dame was better than Indiana last year. And then you add home field advantage on top of that. That's why a lot of those games were lopsided. This spread is sitting at anywhere from, I think, 3.5 to 5.5 in favor of A&M. It is early, so there is going to be a diversity in lines across the board. But a lot of that has to do with home field advantage. A lot of this line does. Books and power ratings view these teams pretty evenly, and I know that FPI views Miami as the better team on a neutral field. The trenches for these teams are a big part of their identity and a huge part of their success. They each have star pass rushers and defensive ends. If you don't know their names already, check out Cassius Howell for Texas A&M. He has 10.5 sacks on the year, and they also have some really nice linebackers, and nice as being conservative, with Tareen York and Scooby Williams and Damon Sanford, Tyler Onyedim, Albert Regis, T.J. Searcy. It's a defensive front that is capable, that is dominant, and then we have some kind of back and forth here between the Texas A&M offensive line and the Miami defensive line. Texas A&M has a impressive O-line with Trezon III, Demetrius Crownover, Armaj Reed-Adams, and Chase Basantis, and center Mark Naboo. But you look at Miami's defensive front, and Ruben Bain Jr. is among one of the most impactful defensive linemen, if not the most impactful defensive lineman in America. Surefire first-round pick. And A&M said that, you know what, he may not be the biggest impact on them. So there's already going to be some tension there. And these trench units are among the nation's best. There's tension there. Ahmad Moten Sr., Akeem Mesidor, David Blay, Ruben Bain Jr., they have good size there. They have had depth come through on the defensive line in a way that I and others didn't know whether or not they had that in the preseason, and they've stayed healthy there. Rutgers transfer Mohamed Toure came in and leads the team in tackles. Wesley Besant, Thrall Aguirre Jr. have done well, and this secondary has improved. So it's a great defense for Miami, led by their defensive line. Their offensive line for the Hurricanes is their best part of the offense. And for Texas A&M, they have an offense that is, among the nation's best and at the top in the SEC, very veteran-laden, and they have an impactful player in Cassius Howell on that defensive line. That is going to be the defining factor in this game. Quarterback could also be defining here, but I think that the trench warfare is going to play the biggest part because those units have such high upside. A&M's, I think, is a much lower floor than Miami's in the trenches, where if one side really comes to play and wants it more and comes out and dominates, quarterback play might be totally irrelevant. That's how good these lines of scrimmage could be. I do think that with several weeks to prepare, and since neither of these teams played in the SEC title, so they're resting, they have an ability to be healthy. They probably got up yesterday. It's Monday at the time of this recording. So Sunday, they probably got up seeing their matchup and started watching film and started dissecting their opponent. I imagine these quarterbacks will play some of their best football when you factor in the opponent they have to play. So that means quarterback ceiling is going to be a factor here, as I expect Miami and A&M to prep well, especially those two teams amongst all the teams in the playoff. Why? It's their first time here, and Miami wasn't exactly expecting to be here for much of the year, really half of the year after that second loss to SMU. And while A&M expected to be here, it's their first, and a lot of people have doubted them and have been talking negativity to them and to their way. So whether it's Marcel Reed, whether it is Carson Beck, they have both struggled with inaccuracy and inconsistency. They both have made dumbheaded, boneheaded decisions, whatever term you want to use. They've also made some nice throws. They also can really have an impact on a defense and have NFL upside. So which quarterback comes to play and plays the best? And which matches up best with the opposing defense? It's interesting because on one hand, Reed was in the Heisman conversation at one point later in the year, and he probably has better receivers than Beck does, and probably has a better offense or similar offense, but also they're very different stylistically. On the other hand, Miami's defense in every metric is better than Texas A&M's. This is where power rushing comes into effect. This does relate to trench warfare, but it also relates to the quarterbacks and the running backs and how much they are willing to be utilized in the ground attack. How do the running backs earn yards after contact? Whose feet keep moving forward, keep running forward, even after it seems like the play might be dead or stopped. Miami has only a 40.5% rushing success rate. They don't have a lot of long runs. It's a lot of short runs. Their rushing attack has improved recently, but part of that may also be due to the fact their November slate was pretty easy. A&M does not have the best rushing offense in the world either, but per success rate and in general, it has been a more productive unit than Miami's. A&M comes across to me as more of a finesse team. Miami is more of a physical team. And I'm not saying A&M isn't physical. I'm not saying Miami has no finesse or swagger. I think both are tough. I think both are admirable. Both are future consistent college football playoff contenders with the way they recruit and develop and the coaches they have. But they do have different styles. And I think that this is something that is going to impact the game and change the game that I believe really goes Miami's way, which is power rushing. Those explosive plays, when you look at how Miami and Texas A&M function, A&M is more likely to give up those plays along with more likely to produce them. So I think that really balances out. Pass rush is something to consider. When you look at havoc rate, which a lot of that is TFLs and sacks, aggression by the defense, but also interceptions, passes defended, both of these teams are top 5 in those areas. Miami with a 17.8% havoc rate generated, A&M with a 19% havoc rate generated. So who gets to the quarterback more often? Who can rattle him? Who is in a better position to make interceptions, make plays on the ball? Who disguises their coverages better? Who reads the eyes of the quarterback better? This is shaping up to be a really great game. I'm close to making a pick. I know which team I'm leaning towards, but it is a little too early. This is anyone's ball game here. And I do think it is appropriate that A&M is favored because these teams are so even and have some similarities, and where they have differences, they kind of cancel out each other's strengths or weaknesses. So home field advantage can be the ultimate tiebreaker, and that obviously leans A&M's way. Another important factor, though, is the secondary. We've seen both of these teams. For Miami, it was against SMU. For Texas A&M, it was against South Carolina, and it was against Texas. We have seen these teams falter in coverage in key moments. A&M was able to get away with it against South Carolina because South Carolina sucks. They don't have good coaching. They're very momentum-based, and they were an absolute mess roster-wise. Their roster was basically Lenora Sellers and Dylan Stewart and a few players at secondary, and once a game Nick Harbor because he's just that athletic, and no one else. And really the only great players on the team were Dylan Stewart and Lenora Sellers, and that was it. You couldn't get away with that against a much better team in Texas. And for Miami, I mean, those SMU and Louisville games were very, very messy. And the fact that they lost to those two teams, A&M lost to Texas, and yet Miami's power rated higher in FPI, you would wonder how in the heck FPI came to that conclusion that Miami is rated higher than A&M given some of their weird losses. But it happens, and the secondary has been a part of questionable areas with these defenses. So I think whoever can clean that up, and whoever, whether it's, locking down Malachi Toney for Texas A&M as he's Miami's biggest weapon, or whether it is for Miami making sure that Mario Craver and Casey Conception and Terry Bussey don't get open, or whether that circles back to the pass rush being more important than the secondary, some pass defense is going to have to step up here. Someone's going to have to. I didn't mention the run game that much, only because Miami's rushing attack, while improving, still has questions, and A&M's front, I think, is good enough to neutralize some of that. And then for A&M, their rushing attack in theory is better, but Miami's run defense and their D-line is one of the best in America. So I think a lot of this game will come down to line of scrimmage, and if that's equal, this will all distill into the passing game, the receivers, the secondary, and the quarterbacks. And that's my early preview of Miami and Texas A&M. I think it should be a pretty good game. It's a shame that it couldn't be later in the day. It's a shame that that couldn't have been at night, but at least at night we get to see Alabama and Oklahoma. We have a rematch on our hands as the 9th-ranked Alabama Crimson Tide, only 3-loss team in this year's college football playoff. Last year, the only 3-loss team was a 10-3 Clemson that won their conference. This 10-3 team in Alabama lost their conference championship game. They travel to 10-2 Oklahoma, who has that head-to-head win over Alabama on the road in the regular season, and they are ranked 8th. Alabama is a 1.5-point favorite, and this is the Friday night game. It's a standalone college football playoff first round game. And I like that this is on Friday night. I would have preferred that Texas A&M and Miami were also at night on Saturday, and the two games in Oregon JMU and Tulane Ole Miss would have been warm-ups earlier in the day, because honestly, especially Oregon and James Madison, that's going to be a cakewalk for the Ducks. But at least we have football. This is going to be a great game. The odds makers, the books, and the power ratings certainly think so. This game reads to me as a complete toss-up, a total toss-up, with Alabama being the better team in power ratings, but Oklahoma holding that precious head-to-head win that matters above all else. And this time, Alabama has to travel to Norman. And shockingly enough, Kalen DeBoer doesn't lose all that much. He doesn't. He doesn't lose to coaches multiple times all that much. And yet he has an 0-2 record against Brent Venables, with an opportunity to break that streak, but also an opportunity for Venables to solidify himself as one of the most improved coaches, or one of the most underrated coaches in all of college football, by extending a win streak over Kalen DeBoer to 3, his win streak. I'm going to go with rushing offense here. And the reason I'm going this way is because Oklahoma should have a hefty advantage here. They have the better run defense, and they have the slightly better rushing offense with a higher rushing success rate, with a superior yards per carry, and a superior expected points added per run. Oklahoma's staff is also much more willing to utilize John Mateer in the ground game than Alabama is with Ty Simpson. So Oklahoma should have an advantage here, and that's important because Alabama's the favorite, and I don't think anyone is going to deny that Alabama has the roster advantage. The reason they lost to Oklahoma is because Oklahoma took the football away, and that is easier to correct than some of Oklahoma's issues, where they really struggle to score more than high teens, low 20s against competent defenses that they play. I mean, their offense is one of the worst in the SEC. I would argue their defense is probably the best in the SEC. Pretty strong juxtaposition there. They've won a lot of close games. They are well coached. They are disciplined. Only losses of the year have come to an 11-1 Ole Miss team and a 9-3 Texas team that, per strength of schedule and strength of record and power rating and who they've beaten and who they've lost to, that Texas team should probably be in the playoffs along with Oklahoma. And that would be pretty cool if we could get a Red River rematch in the playoffs one day. Wouldn't be shocked if that happens, given the trajectory of both of these programs. But for the Crimson Tide, they can't run the ball to save their life. Oklahoma at times has shown promise with running the football, but Alabama also has a defensive front that is good enough to where if they're amped up, if they try hard, if they show up, and I think some of that may have been lacking in the SEC championship game, strangely enough, though I don't know. Maybe that was just Georgia beating them that badly, but things did look off. I'm not going to account it to an effort thing, but something happened to where Georgia took over them mentally. And I imagine they will rid themselves of that in this game, and it will be the best effort of both teams. Could be wrong, though, but it's an observation I had from the SEC championship game. The offensive line play. This is something where Alabama's offense has struggled in, where Caden Proctor allows pressure after pressure after pressure, and again, they can't run the ball. And that is partially due to their running backs not having tremendous vision, just not being super talented. It's also due to their offensive line. It is an offensive line that is big, that is powerful, that has a high ceiling in theory, but has never lived up to the expectations and has not really ever looked special. It's never, to me, on film, it has never looked as good as Kalen DeBoer's offensive lines at Washington, for example. It's never really been that close. Oklahoma's has had some bright spots at tackle, but that's mostly because they had awful offensive line play back in 2024. So they're building from a different place than Alabama is. Alabama entered the year with many people saying they would have the best offensive line or something close to it. And with Oklahoma, many questioned whether or not the offensive line was going to be much better than it was last year when they surrendered 50 sacks. So that's going to be something important here. Oklahoma's havoc rate is not very good, allowing a 13.9% havoc rate, but it's serviceable enough with their defense to where at home anything can happen and they can probably win any game. For Alabama, their havoc rate at a 10.3%, it's good, yeah, and I would say their offensive line is good, but people were expecting this unit to be elite. It's what Ohio State's is to the Big Ten, where many projected Alabama and Ohio State to have these phenomenal offensive lines, and for this entire year, they've never really had that. They have been anywhere from good to straight up disappointing, and they have never been really in that elite category. And through multiple games now, Alabama and Ohio State have both played 13. I don't expect them to all of a sudden click there and look phenomenal. That would be really unreasonable. Alabama, same with Oklahoma, same with any of these teams, just are who they are at this point. And something that has been an issue for both of these teams as well, but again, with the surprises in a negative way for Alabama too, has been quarterback ball security. You know, John Mateer this season has done a lot of good things, but Mateer has also not been a very good passing quarterback in SEC play. You know, he only has 12 passing touchdowns, 10 interceptions, a 128.4 passer rating. When you look at Ty Simpson for the Alabama Crimson Tide, he started off rough against Florida State, then really improved, and he's just kind of been up and down. Feels like almost every other week he has a bad performance and then a good performance, and they're interweaving with each other. You know, Ty Simpson on the season has 5 interceptions, 26 touchdowns. He's not a turnover machine, but against Oklahoma, he was. He threw that really bad pick 6, took 4 sacks at a 68.4 quarterback efficiency rating, nearly threw another that was called back due to an Oklahoma penalty, and he's just been off and not very accurate recently. So that's something to keep in mind here. And both of these secondaries, Oklahoma and Alabama, and their defenses are going to take advantage of mistakes that you present to them. Pass defense, we were just talking about that. Alabama is 27th in yards per dropback allowed. Oklahoma is 25th. Now, Oklahoma's defensive front is among one of the nation's best. Their defensive tackles, defensive ends, their linebackers are Mason Thomas, David Stone, Kip Lewis, and, you know, that entire defensive front is really, really impressive. And it's something that I think any team in college football, minus maybe Texas and maybe Ohio State, maybe a handful of other teams would not want to have, if you know what I mean, where they would want those players. It's among the best. And for Alabama, they have, Tim Keenan III. They've been dealing with some injuries, though. Not to Tim Keenan, but a lot of their starters were out in that SEC championship game. And I wonder how much they get back for this game, because if they're just as banged up as they were against Georgia and they look that exact same way, I don't know if they win. But if they're healthier and they play much better, I imagine that they would possibly come through. And this would certainly be a game. The defensive fronts are going to play a factor here for sure. But the secondaries have similar numbers. And I think while Alabama's is better, I am curious to see with how both of these passing attacks have almost converged in recent weeks, whether or not that continues, or if Alabama plays like they did in the month of, October and September, late September, and their passing attack really comes alive here against a pass defense that, look, struggled against Texas and against Arch Manning and Ole Miss and Trinidad Chambliss. Line of scrimmage push is the final thing here. I say this because both lines of scrimmage are inconsistent and unbalanced. Alabama sometimes can be good at stopping the run. Other times they really struggle at it. Their offensive line is up and down. Oklahoma's offensive line is even more up and down. Their D-line is perfect, but it's paired with the worst line of scrimmage unit in this game. So who, more often than not, gets their feet past the line first, in a positive way where they're pushing forward, not them being pushed back? That is something I'm interested in here. And maybe I should have put that towards the top, because I think that can have a real impact where if Alabama has the air attack advantage, it will not matter if Oklahoma gets to Ty Simpson and pressures him every other pass attempt, then Oklahoma will win. If Alabama can protect Ty Simpson and get to John Mateer, then even with a standout effort by Oklahoma's defense, as long as Simpson is not turning it over on his own accord, then Alabama will probably win. It's going to be a good game. This matchup will determine who goes to the Rose Bowl to face off against the Indiana Hoosiers. And wow, you talk about history being made with Indiana, but also talk about history being made here with Kalen DeBoer for the first time at Alabama reaching the college football playoff after missing it last year. And for Oklahoma, they make the college football playoff for the first time since 2019 after some close losses kept them out of the playoffs in 2023. And that's all she wrote for those first round games. That is it for those games. We'll get to some playoff predictions here in a minute, but I do want to discuss some takeaways that I have from the Big Ten championship game. That is something that I do want to discuss, and then we can get to those predictions and some thoughts I have on some other teams. Just gotta crack my neck. There. Felt a little off. Yeah. I still cannot believe what happened. I cannot believe it, guys. Seriously. The fact that Indiana is not just in the playoffs again, that I very much can believe. We talked about that having a much higher chance of happening than most believed in the preseason. But the fact that they are, how do I put this? They won the Big Ten. They are 13-0. And the fact that Curt Cignetti has either an undefeated record or a 500 record against every Big Ten coach that he's faced so far. That's insane. That's mind-boggling, honestly. Absolutely crazy. And it's historic, too. And something I'll get to, because we're going to talk about Ohio State first. We saved the best for last. But something I do want to entertain over these next few weeks and months, because I don't know how much my opinion can or even will be changed after that game about this. I do want to entertain the possibility that the best head coach in the Big Ten resides in Bloomington, Indiana, because that game, I mean, both teams made mistakes. Both offenses left points off the board. Both defenses played outstanding. And yet it felt like, even though it felt like even though for Indiana they were down early and kind of in a hole that they created themselves with that, Mendoza screen pass that was picked off by Igbinosun. Good play by him. Where they were down and, it was 7-3 and it looked like maybe Ohio State was about to go up 14-3. They were in a hole there. And they came back and they won and they did enough to hang on for a win. That was impressive. And I thought while Ohio State didn't have a bad game plan and they did make some good adjustments, like later in the second half, they really went to the quick game. They did change up some stuff on the offensive line too that helped, but I think more importantly than that, they went to the quick game. They stopped trying to go two downfield with the passes because those took a long time to develop with the coverage that Indiana had. And then Indiana produced coverage sacks with their exotic looks. They were able to eventually figure out Ohio State's protection and get to the quarterback. And in order to make sure that they were preventing Indiana from generating as many negative plays as possible, it felt like Ohio State went to more of a quick game where they were willing to take checkdowns more often. And that resulted in them slowly and methodically driving down the field. The problem is, as we've seen with Ohio State beforehand, once they got in the red zone and the field compressed, and therefore, it's harder to it gets harder and harder and harder to gain those additional yards because defenders are closer to the line of scrimmage. Ohio State's offense really slowed down. Even on that pass where Sayin found Carnell Tate open in the back of the end zone, you could say that was a missed assignment. And there was an Indiana defender chasing Sayin, and that was a great play by Sayin in terms of on-field awareness, knowing where the defenders were in proximity to him. Indiana got pressure on that play. So it was a really good game. And I think that there's some overreaction going on with Ohio State, and it's probably because some people expected this team to be something that I don't quite know if they are, but we'll talk about it here. The Buckeyes are an elite team that simply isn't in their own tier. Last year at the end, it was clear they were in their own tier and no one was with them. I don't think that's the case with this team this year. They could still be number one in power ratings. The books view them as having the highest chances of reaching the college football playoff, but I don't think they're in their own tier where they're clearly several points better than everyone else. I don't think that way after watching this game, nor did I think that way about them entering this game. But this game confirmed that. Ohio State can still win it all, but there are flaws to clean up. That is my main takeaway, the thesis of all of my takeaways from the Big Ten championship game. When you suffer your first loss since November of last year, you go a full 365 days without suffering a loss, and in that time frame, you go 4-0 against FPI top 10 teams in last year's playoffs. You beat Texas, the preseason number one team. You beat Penn State. You beat Washington. You crush Michigan in their own place. You're the number one team in power ratings and the favorite to win it all. And your first loss is against an undefeated team with an elite coach, with the best quarterback in America who's going to win the Heisman. And it's by 3 points. You can win it all. You can. I mean, Indiana's number one in FPI right now, and they're number two in S&P Plus. They're number one in FEI. They are either the number two or number one team in America. Indiana is, according to most power ratings. I think they are certainly top three in power ratings, and in terms of the most deserving ranking, they are unanimously number one. The only undefeated team beat Ohio State. They beat Oregon. You get the picture. This loss does not take anything away from Ohio State. This game told me nothing about the Buckeyes, in my opinion, that I didn't already know. They are unanimously top two in power ratings, and like with Indiana, I think Ohio State at the very worst right now is the third best team in America. I say that for both because I do believe Georgia deserves to be in that top three conversation. They're not going to be in power ratings because they started the year off slower and they did play a tougher strength of schedule than the Buckeyes and the Hoosiers did, and their style of play is a little bit different, but I think they deserve to be up there regardless. Those are the three favorites per the books, per ESPN's bracket picks from the public, per my eyes, and actually per even, I believe, the power ratings to win it all when you look at ESPN's FPI. So that's takeaway number one. And that's the most important thing. Because if Ohio State wins it all, well, the season's automatically a success. I think because of the Michigan win, the 12 regular season wins, and the fact that a lot of this team's coming back next year, if they simply win a playoff game or two, I think the season is a success. It may not feel that way with how phenomenal this defense is, though. And that's another takeaway that I have from the Big Ten Championship game. This is the first team since 1975 Florida to not allow an opponent to score, I think it's either 20 points flat or more than 20 points in the regular season. Or maybe it's they haven't allowed a team to score more than 16 points in the regular season. This is a historic defense. Let's say somehow in the playoffs they allow a 30 or 40 burger and lose. That'd be disappointing, but this defense would still be remembered for holding Indiana to 13 points. And if Indiana somehow makes that field goal, it's still 16. That's really impressive. For holding Texas to 7, for holding Michigan to 9, despite an interception basically inside of Michigan's red zone or very close to it, and for holding opponents to under 9 points per game in the regular season and conference championship week. They're only allowing 0.156 points per play. That is the best since 2021 Georgia. That is wow. And with players like Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Caden McDonald, Caden Curry, who has 11 sacks after a phenomenal performance in Indianapolis, Caleb Downs, Davison Igbinosun, Kenyatta Jackson Jr., you get the whole picture. It's full of NFL studs. They have an NFL defensive coordinator. The defense by a mile is the strongest side of the football. Not a whole lot changed for me after watching that game from Ohio State. Something that did change for me is that I earned a respect for both defenses, and I didn't lose respect for either offense, but I did realize that both offenses maybe have more vulnerabilities than I expected or thought, or the defenses are so much better than I believed them to be that they made the offenses look a little bit pedestrian at times. But the defense for Ohio State in this matchup was phenomenal. I give it an A+ grade. It was the best side of the football. Same thing with Indiana's defense, and Ohio State's defense is the best in college football to this date. Wide receiver 1 and 2 for Ohio State are elite. That's another takeaway I had from this game. Were they targeted a ton? Not necessarily, but Indiana also did a great job disguising their coverages, sending pressure. The early interception definitely rattled Sayin and made him question things and his confidence, and the receivers weren't always open. D'Angelo Pons did a good job covering Jeremiah Smith. Smith just sometimes made some catches because he's that good. Jeremiah Smith in this draft, if he were eligible, would be round 1, pick 1. Unless a team at the top desperately needed a quarterback, he would be round 1, pick 1. He's the most talented player in college football. He's the best player in college football. The Heisman deserves to go to him or Fernando Mendoza is who it deserves to go to. And Carnell Tate, he's made so many strides from where he was last year. He's better in every way. And last year he was phenomenal. But this year, he's even rivaling Jeremiah Smith in terms of overall ability and performance. And that's impressive. There were so many plays later in the game, and even earlier in the game, where it felt like Indiana was breathing down Ohio State's neck. They really always were. But then, as were customary to with Ohio State, the receivers bailed Ohio State out. And why do they bail Ohio State out? It's not because Ohio State's a bad team that happens to have great players. It's because they're a great team that then has elite NFL receivers to where even against one of the best defenses in college football, they can bail themselves out of trouble when the run game isn't working or the pass protection isn't working, and they can find a way to extend drives. This we already knew, obviously. A lot of what I am telling you are things that we already knew because these teams have played in 12 games before. But it's good to refresh our memory because sometimes there can be overreactions or sometimes things can get missed. Something I want to discuss with the offensive line here. It had a really bad night, but this isn't something that is surprising to me. I would have been surprised if Ohio State did well in pass blocking against this Indiana defense. I would have been shocked if they looked good in run blocking. This offensive line is the first for Ohio State in a minute that does not have an alien starting for it. They don't have a Donovan Jackson. They do not have a Paris Johnson Jr. They don't have some of those Urban Meyer offensive linemen that were a lock to be in the first round or just absolutely phenomenal centers. It's a good unit for the FBS. But against an elite defense, it's going to have a matchup disadvantage against the best defenses in college football. It's going to have a massive matchup disadvantage. The run game was a mess. I mean, Bo Jackson, the longest and most productive runs he had were more so because of him than the blocking. There were some nicely blocked plays, don't get me wrong, but those were few and far between, and more often than not, it was Bo Jackson's legs that kept any part of the ground game going. Phillip Daniels, especially Tegra Shabola, struggled in pass protection, but there were some reps where even the left side of the offensive line were got as well. Neither of the offensive linemen received good grades from PFF. They did not look great in the game. Later in the game, as Shabola got subbed out and Van Sickle came in, they looked better. But I also did notice a change in strategy from Ohio State where they were, slowing things down and trying to go with more of a quick game. They involved some trick plays. They tried to change some things up. And I think that caught Indiana off guard and helped take the game away from where Indiana wanted it to be. Indiana wanted Ohio State to try to go deep and to try and, force passes deep. And they played that for a while because Ohio State wanted to be aggressive as they've tried to be ever since that Michigan loss last year. And that's good. It's a really good thing. But with the offensive line situation, deep passes, even with these receivers, need time to develop. And while Sayin had enough time to get the ball out in quick situations, when things needed to develop or he needed to make a quick decision or he needed to fit the window or he needed to fit the ball into a tight window, Indiana was either good enough in coverage to discourage him from doing that, and they were also good enough in coverage to give the pass rush time to get home. And sometimes the pass rush straight up got home. It isn't all on the offensive line, though. That's why I said gettable. I'm not saying the unit is horrible, but against the top-end defenses, it is going to be got. It just is what it is. Is the same thing last year in the playoffs, though, and Ohio State still won it all because they had elite pass blocking running backs, they had 3 NFL receivers, and they had a quarterback in Will Howard who had some legs, who could provide a numbers advantage in the ground game, and who, did a really good job with his veteran presence and, great footwork of evading pressure. Sayin is about as good as Howard there. He's not as veteran, though, so I don't think the decision-making is quite as crisp. But Ohio State doesn't have the elite pass-blocking running backs, and they have 2 NFL receivers and not 3. I don't think Innis is there quite yet, even though I think he's good and undervalued. So that was something that I hope we already knew. I already knew that. But I think a lot of people after the Michigan game thought the Ohio State offensive line is peaking, and no. It's they have issues that need a full preseason of work and another year under that staff to fix. The good news about that is, again, Ohio State can probably win it all in spite of those issues, and this entire core should come back next year and be better with another good year of coaching and development. The final piece I want to leave everyone with, and I think this is something that for a lot of people was new. For me, it wasn't, but this solidified it. And I wasn't totally confident in my thought that this Ohio State team was limited in ways that last year's team was not, because they were undefeated. Ryan Day's an elite coach. He runs the number 1 program in college football, and that's true even after this loss to Indiana in the Big Ten title game. But As I mentioned earlier, they don't have two NFL running backs. They only have two NFL receivers instead of three. And at this point, you would probably take Will Howard's ability to create the threat of the run and that big body and strong legs to be able to go in a QB power situation with a numbers edge. And you'd also probably take who he was in the playoffs over who Hussein is right now. And you realize that on top of Donovan Jackson no longer being on the O-line, you think, wow, holy cow, this offense is still wonderful, but the amount of aliens they had has been basically halved from where it was last year. And that makes it that much easier for the best defenses to defend this offense compared to last year's offense, which Texas and Indiana had phenomenal game plans for, and they still were able to score, in the low 20s purely from offensive plays by themselves because they were that good and that dynamic to put together enough plays to win games and to keep games within their control. This team isn't quite that good offensively. Defensively, I'm as close to as ever in saying that maybe this defense is better than last year's, because holding this Indiana offense to 13 points, even though I know Indiana had some plays they probably wanted back, that's very impressive. Indiana's offense across the board is better than it was last year. As a team, they are probably better at every position than they were last year. Most notably along the offensive line, at special teams, and I would actually say at quarterback. Mendoza's accuracy is night and day different and better than Curtis Rourke, who a lot of the time was, he hit his receivers with enough accuracy for them to catch it, but he was not on target, as in ball to torso, ball to chest, nearly as much as Fernando Mendoza is. So Ohio State simply played an Indiana team that is way better than it was last year, and they themselves, I think, are worse than they were last year. But last year, they were in their own tier. They were the best team in America by, at the end of the year, probably a touchdown compared to the second best team. They're not that team this year. They could be the best in power ratings. I think at very worst, they're behind Indiana and Georgia and probably no one else at this point. That's at worst. At best, they're still the number one team in America, and they just happen to lose to number 2 or number 3. But they are going to have to do an even better job at mitigating any weaknesses they have compared to last year, because they just aren't overwhelmingly better than the rest of the field from a roster angle. They are overwhelmingly better than most teams from a roster angle, but this year's Georgia and this year's Indiana, I think, along with, maybe a full-strength Oregon, are more of a threat to Ohio State than any team last year was to the 2024 Buckeyes. They can still win it all. This is still an elite team with an elite operation. No, I do not think Ohio State had a terrible game plan against Indiana, though I think they certainly had some bad calls and needed to make better adjustments. Everything is fine. The loss sucks. It's painful. This team still has bigger and brighter things ahead of it if they simply take the opportunity, learn from their mistakes, mitigate their weaknesses, and try to play to their strengths. And it also depends, because they're, not as dominant over the rest of the fields they were last year. It also does depend to a certain degree what their opponent brings to the table. This Ohio State team, I think, could play their absolute best game, and Georgia could still get them and beat them, for example, and maybe Indiana too. So keep that in mind. It's a wonderful team. There's a reason they're the favorites to win it all, and we'll just have to see what happens. Now we can talk about Indiana. And my analysis with Indiana is that the Hoosiers are the best team in America when healthy. Now, that's certainly a caveat. I think from a resume, from a merit-based ranking or rating, they are number 1. FPI has them as the number 1 power-rated team in America right now and the most efficient team in America. I agree with both of those things. I would have them number 1 in power ratings myself, and I do think that on a per-play basis, they are the most efficient team. A lot of that has to do with the fact, I think, in an undisputed way, I think they have the number one staff in America. I think there's a debate as to whether or not they're the number one power-rated team, with Georgia and potentially Ohio State as superior rosters, units, and teams. But I think Indiana has the best staff. Not head coach, though I'm starting to trend that way as well. We'll see how the playoffs pans out. I love me some Kirby Smart, and I don't want to disrespect, Ryan Day either. Those are the top three head coaches. Coincidentally, they command the top three teams. But as an overall staff, head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, position coaches, yes, I do think Indiana has the best there. And that's my biggest takeaway from the Big Ten championship game, is that this staff, on any given Saturday, if their team is at full strength or close to it, because keep in mind, Khalil Benson didn't play for this entire game. I think he was a little bit banged up. And Omar Cooper Jr. didn't play for the whole game. So they were not at full strength. And they beat Ohio State. And Ohio State held them to 13 points. And they got pressure. And they slowed down Indiana's run game enough to where Indiana was often in, third and medium, third and long when they had to convert it. And they forced plenty of punts. And Indiana still won. I don't think you guys understand. I don't even understand how crazy that is. I can't even comprehend it. Ohio State's the number one program in America. They were just on a 16-0 win streak. They were on a 4-game win streak. Actually, no, because Michigan last year was not a top 10 team in power ratings. They were just on a 6-game win streak of beating opponents who either finished the year in the top 10 of FPI or, as of right now, are inside the top 10 of FPI. That's nothing short of insane to be on that type of a run. It's like Georgia's run under Kirby Smart when they, didn't lose a game from the start of the 2021 playoffs until the 2023 SEC championship game. That was a crazy run. That was like some of Dabo Swinney's runs at Clemson. It mind-boggling stuff. And Indiana dethroned that team in the same way that a well-coached, wonderful Alabama team dethroned Georgia in 2023, where I think that was one of Nick Saban's better coaching jobs, actually, given the state of that roster. Or how in 2019, I don't know about coaching job, but the eliteness of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and that roster, they dethroned Clemson's run. Only elite staffs or elite units dethrone those type of dynasty-esque runs. There has to be something great about the team who does that. And with Indiana, I think it's their staff, and I think it's Fernando Mendoza. The clearest difference between these two teams, outside of Indiana's offensive line versus Ohio State's, was the quarterback play. That was the biggest difference in the game. The most noticeable differences in game were the following four things. Indiana's receivers being bigger than Ohio State's corners. Ohio State as an overall team being larger than Indiana. Indiana matching, well, that's not a difference, but we'll get to that later. Indiana's offensive line very much outperforming Ohio State's offensive line. And Fernando Mendoza clearly having more NFL attributes and more of a clutch gene and better decision-making than Julian Sayin. And Sayin is an awesome quarterback. So what that means is that Mendoza's quarterback won. He is the best quarterback in college football, and he's going to be the first quarterback taken off the board in the 2026 NFL Draft. Circling back to the line of scrimmage, I want to ask you a question, and I hope that in the comment section you can give me an answer. Does Indiana have the best line of scrimmage in college football? And if not, which team has better lines of scrimmage? Because, it's not like Ohio State's lines of scrimmage are bad. Their offensive line is surely questionable, but that's only because we're talking about them within the context of a playoff setting. It's still a good offensive line. It's just not great or not elite. Their defensive line is elite. So on average, they have one of the best lines of scrimmage in football. Miami's is up there. Georgia's is up there. Oregon's is up there. Indiana's is up there. It was better than Ohio State's, and Ohio State has one of the best lines in football. So, yeah, I mean, do they, despite not having the blue chip ratio of all of these other lines of scrimmage, do they have the best in college football? It's something that I would love to get an answer on. But Indiana is 16th in havoc rate allowed, and it's after playing Oregon's defense, Iowa's defense, Ohio State's defense, Penn State's defense on the road, and they are top 5 in havoc rate forced. And their run defense is criminally underrated. They sure as heck, when you talk to people, you hear the term that they're undersized. And I can tell you on the offensive line, they aren't. They aren't at defensive end. At defensive tackle, they have, Tyreek Tucker, who's appropriately sized. But some of their players that maybe are a little bit smaller than some other elite college players, they don't play like it at all. And I don't really think that's a factor when you see how Indiana has played through 13 games, particularly on the lines. The defense is phenomenal. I talked about this in my Ohio State takeaways. Both of these defenses, I think, have an edge to them that I don't quite know if Texas Tech has. Texas Tech is a better defensive line than either of these teams from a pass rush and havoc creation and NFL standpoint. Like David Bailey and Romello Height are better defensive ends than Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson. They are better than Michael Kamara and Stephen Daly. That I'm very confident in, by the way. Bailey is an absolute freak. Height's very close to that. And I know Indiana and Ohio State are freakish there too. But it's really Bailey that takes the cake there. However, Indiana's linebacker core, from a college angle, I'm very close to saying is the best. From a versatility and depth angle, like Isaiah Jones, who's their third guy, is really good. Fisher's an All-American. Elijah Hardy leads the team in sacks. That 3-deep linebacker attack is... I don't know if there is a group of 3 linebackers when only looking at, one team, not randomly selecting 3 linebackers, that is better than this Hoosier group. From a college angle, again. And believe me, I think all of those players are going to at least get a look from an NFL camp invite. They'll get drafted on day 3, day 2. I mean, Jack Campbell got drafted round 1 by the Lions, so maybe someone takes Aiden Fisher that high. I mean, Fisher's really good. It's a amazing defense. When you're allowing under 1/5 of a point per play, and you've played Oregon and Ohio State, that's to be commended right there. You've played some of the top offenses in football, some of the most talented offenses, and great quarterbacks. And you didn't play them at home. You played Oregon on the road and Ohio State neutral field, and you held Oregon to 13 offensive points, and you held Ohio State to 10 offensive points. That is pretty incredible. And this defense is top 3 in FPI efficiency. It's barely behind Ohio State's there. Texas Tech at this point is a mile ahead of everyone in defensive efficiency. But I think a lot of that is their explosiveness, the constant forcing of turnovers, the constant TFLs and sacks. I would take Indiana and Ohio State's backfield over Texas Tech's. Just a phenomenal defensive showing in the Big Ten championship game. And the Hoosiers have NFL players. They have a first-rounder in Mendoza, and most of their other starters are day 2 or day 3 guys. And there are some who could possibly play themselves into the late first round. Some. If Carter Smith continues to put the performances he's had this year on tape against awesome defensive lines in a year where teams are going to be desperate for a tackle and it's not a loaded tackle class because Smith didn't start the year with this type of draft type. He could easily find himself in that late first round consideration, I think. And then Pons, who has been flirted with day 1, day 2 preseason, he made himself money with how he played against Jeremiah Smith. That much I know. And there might be a team or two or even several teams who are willing to say, I don't care that he's 5'9", because he covers better than some of the players who are a half foot taller than him and have better measurables. Pons' tackling, his speed, his ball tracking, he's incredible. And he made a lot of money this past Saturday. The last point to make is that Indiana's not invincible. I said this in my reaction to the Big Ten championship game. Don't sell Ohio State stock unless you thought they were invincible, because they're not. And buy Indiana stock if you undervalued them, but don't buy so much stock that all of your eggs are in one basket, because they're not invincible. And I think that the most passionate Indiana fan will agree with that. They played Iowa close. They played Penn State close. They were battling with Oregon, and they battled with Ohio State. But at the end of the day, they controlled Oregon. They did to Oregon what Texas Tech did to Utah. And literally, road team, clearly better at the end of the day. They were back and forth with Iowa and with Penn State. They had an opportunity to control Penn State, and I think if they were healthy, that game's probably never in doubt, and they probably never blow that lead. And against Ohio State, they put themselves in a hole early. And they made some uncharacteristic mistakes with penalties, and they didn't have Omar Cooper, and they still won. So I think this team's number 1. And with a whole month to rest, and maybe they can even get Kellen Wyatt back, they'll make sure everyone's healthy. And with that staff, with a month to prepare for either Alabama or Oklahoma, I think there's a really good chance they don't just go down in history for winning the Big Ten for the first time since 1965 and outright for the first time since 1944. There's a great chance this team goes down in history as the first team to ever go 16-0. And by a great chance, I do not mean they're the overwhelming favorite. I mean relative to Indiana's history and relative to the rest of the field, there's only a handful of other teams that can even sniff Indiana's odds. The only other teams in my book that can are Ohio State and Georgia. Everyone else is well below Indiana from a probability standpoint, I think, in winning it all, given Indiana's current power rating and the fact that they have to play Oklahoma or Alabama, who are probably on average more limited than the average of, say, Miami or Texas A&M, for example. So, phenomenal job by Curt Cignetti this year. Best staff in the Big Ten, leaning towards having him as the best head coach in America, but I don't like making, changes in my head coach rankings until the end of the year so I can process everything and try to process it equally and not be super reactive. And I think Indiana right now is the best team in America too. So all of that stuff is well and good. And now we can get to my college football playoff prediction. Who's your Viking? By the way, Sam, the Colorado blogger that you brought in a few weeks ago was a great guest. Yes, we are going to have him back on. I'm going to try to. Hopefully sometime this month. Hopefully sometime this week or next. But I'll let you guys know. I'll schedule it out. If, with my guest appearances, I'll try to do a better job of scheduling them out very much in advance. Letting you know when those videos will be released, for example. But let's get to my college football playoff predictions now. And if you guys want to say anything to me and want me to respond to it, make sure to send in a super chat, and I will make sure to respond to it immediately. How do I say this? The 3 teams capable of winning it all are Indiana, Georgia, and Ohio State. And there are a few others too, but those are the 3 that I really want to focus on in my college football playoff bracket prediction. I filled out my college football playoff bracket, and I want to go through it with you guys in about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes if we want to talk about some of these matchups with a little more detail. Here are my college football playoff predictions. So, oh, I forgot they're on. This is what happens when you're your own producer. For example, I forgot I have a different frame that I have to showcase them in. I took some time to go through my college football playoff predictions, and here's my bracket. Here is my college football playoff bracket and my predictions for the 2025 college football playoff. So, what we have here is the 12-team playoff bracket. That was poorly done. So, let me redo that. Here are my college football playoff predictions. Here is the bracket for this year. And just to quickly go over the matchups, we have James Madison against Oregon, Alabama against Oklahoma, Tulane against Ole Miss, Miami versus Texas A&M. Teams that I named last in the matchup are the home teams. That's the first round. Texas Tech, Indiana, Georgia, and Ohio State get the first round byes. Going through the first round games yields, in my mind, a Oregon versus Texas Tech Orange Bowl, an Oklahoma versus Indiana Rose Bowl, an Ole Miss versus Georgia Sugar Bowl, and a Miami versus Ohio State Cotton Bowl. A lot of exciting matchups in the quarterfinals. I think all the home teams except for one, in Miami, the road team beating Texas A&M, the home team, triumph. Home field advantage, especially with this long to prepare and this much anticipation building up for fans, I think means more in a playoff setting than it does in the regular season. Just again, because there's more buildup, more anticipation, more excitement here. That plays into it, along with the fact that I think all of the home teams here, except for Texas A&M against Miami, are probably better than their road team, especially when factoring in recency bias, which can be really important. For Alabama, if you factor that out, they're better than Oklahoma, but I think Oklahoma has some good matchups against them, and that home field advantage in Norman is going to be critical. So I'm picking an upset there, also picking an upset in Miami triumphing in a victory over the Aggies in Kyle Field. For the semifinal matchups, I do have Oregon beating Texas Tech, Indiana beating Oklahoma, Georgia beating Ole Miss, and Ohio State beating Miami. Oregon, Texas Tech, and Ohio State, Miami are going to be the toughest and closest games, and the ones with the most build-up. Where Oregon and Texas Tech right now would probably be a pick-em, or very close to it, in an Orange Bowl. Some books probably would have different teams favored in that type of matchup. That'd be a fascinating game with Oregon's offensive line against Texas Tech's defensive line, Oregon's offense against Texas Tech's defense. I think that it would be well known that Oregon's defense would probably do a good job locking down Texas Tech's offense. But what I don't think is as well known is that Texas Tech's defense also is capable of doing that exact same thing to Oregon's offense. I think that would be a game very much that would resemble the Big Ten championship game. Very low scoring, lots of punts. It would probably come down to some key decisions. I wonder which of these teams with a ton of different aliens, impact players, and the want it factor. Both teams, I think, certainly believe they can win it all. Both teams are projected to be able to win it all by power ratings. Who would win it there? I'm going with Oregon because I think they're better coached, and I think their roster all around is more balanced. For Indiana over Oklahoma, it's pretty simple. I don't think Oklahoma can score in Indiana. I think Indiana and Oklahoma have comparable defenses, and Indiana's offense is far better than Oklahoma's. Plus, Indiana's staff is better. They have longer to prepare. They have more of a rest period than the Sooners do. Georgia over Ole Miss is pretty similar. In power ratings, there's a much closer matchup between those two than Indiana and Oklahoma, except you got Kirby Smart against Pete Golding, and Ole Miss's roster in part could be checked out. And Georgia's played Ole Miss before, and with how much Ole Miss is favored to beat Tulane by, Georgia can use the extra week and a half before the Ole Miss-Tulane game to simply prep for Ole Miss instead of, thinking about both teams for that time frame. Ohio State over Miami is because Ohio State's the better team. I think Miami would have an edge in the trenches here. Pretty identical defensive line with the best overall player in Reuben Bain Jr., but Ohio State's close with Caden McDonald, and Miami's offensive line is better than Ohio State's. However, Ohio State's athletes and quarterback play and coaching is superior, and their defensive backfield, especially at linebacker, I think is better. So I would take them with that extra time to prepare and being the better overall team to beat Miami. Now moving on to the semifinals, we have Oregon, Indiana in a rematch in the Peach Bowl, and Georgia, Ohio State in a not rematch per se, but those are mixed up. The Fiesta Bowl is Indiana and Oregon, I think. And I'm actually going to, hold on. I'm going to have to cut this out when I edit it, but hold on. Let me check. Let me check if I have this right or if I'm wrong here. Oh, I didn't even need to do that. Well, that's good, because that means I don't even need to edit it. But yes. Yep. Moving on to the semifinals, we have Indiana and Oregon in a rematch in the Peach Bowl. 13-1 Oregon, 5 seed, against 14-0 Indiana, 1 seed. And in the Fiesta Bowl, we have a rematch from a few playoffs ago where Georgia and Ohio State played in the semifinal. Then the Peach Bowl, it was Michigan and TCU that played in the Fiesta Bowl in 2022, and Georgia edged out a 42-41 win. 3rd seed Georgia, 13-1, against 2nd seed Ohio State, 13-1. Who wins these semifinals? I'm going with Georgia over Ohio State. A lot of this has to do with draw and in part matchups. So Ohio State will actually have to play Miami, I think, for 4 tough quarters, and it will be full-on physical football. I think with Georgia's defensive improvements and the drop-off in coaching from Kiffin to Golding, I think Georgia could run away with that game. And I don't think it would be as physically imposing or tiring to play Ole Miss as it would to play Miami. Then to go a little bit deeper, I do think that Georgia is good enough on the line of scrimmage to match Ohio State there. I do like Georgia's head coach, Kirby Smart, over Ryan Day. They've played before in a game where the matchup screamed Ohio State there, and yet Georgia still won. Georgia has made strides on defense that have impressed me, and they're peaking at the right time where it feels like Ohio State has been improving as you would expect them to from week 1 to week 12, week 13, 14, championship week as a younger team with how much production they lost, but they're not peaking. And Ohio State would be a favorite here. I think most people would pick Ohio State to win this game, but Georgia with the special teams edge, the coaching edge, being able to match Ohio State in the line of scrimmage and having a more balanced line of scrimmage and a more balanced and better offense, I think, would win that game. It'd be tough for Ohio State, although they could win. It'd be the same thing for the Peach Bowl. Part of me says that Oregon would win this game. It's a rematch, hard to beat a good team twice. I think full strength Oregon, with the lessons they've learned, could really win this game. But I need to see Oregon at full strength before I pick them here, because they haven't been at full strength in a while. And Indiana has also shown this knack for winning and having these it plays. And something else you have to consider, especially if Oklahoma beats Alabama, I think Oklahoma would be an easier out for Indiana than Texas Tech would be for Oregon. And being able to get through a game healthy and winning convincingly enough to where you don't have to go full throttle for a full 4 quarters when the field is this even is going to help determine who wins the next game. That's going to help. I also think Indiana has a coaching edge, a special teams edge, is more fundamentally sound. So it's Indiana and it's Georgia for the national championship. I've been going back and forth on this. My 2 brackets in my ESPN account, one has Georgia winning it all. The other actually has Indiana winning it all. And I'm just going to roll with the hot hand here and pick Indiana to win it all because I have been high on them for much of the year. They have not disappointed me. And look, they're number 1 in the analytics. And out of all the teams that could bust the blue chip ratio in the past, present, and probably future, they have that round 1 pick 1 at quarterback and a great enough staff, great enough lines of scrimmage, enough day 2, day 3 NFL players to where I think they can get this done. It especially helps that they have the bye. I know Georgia does too, but Georgia could get through a full 4 games even with some injuries and win it all. I don't quite know if IU has the depth to do that, but right now, IU is mostly, if not totally healthy. They will get close to a month off, and I think that the only draw that's easier than theirs is Georgia's. Georgia's is the easiest draw by a mile. And if any coach can beat Kirby Smart at his own game, I think it's going to be the maniac Curt Cignetti. So it's close. I think that Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon could all prove me wrong. I think that the semifinals most likely will be Oregon versus Indiana and Georgia versus Ohio State. I'm very confident in that. If anyone is going to completely bust this bracket and make me look like a total idiot, which is possible, I would expect it to be Miami, Alabama, or Texas Tech is what I would expect to happen if someone is to completely prove me wrong and bust my confidence in the semifinal matchups that I think will most definitely happen, or bust my national championship pick. Okay. Well, that was fun. Let me know what you guys think about that down in the comment section in the live chat. Big Ten 3 years in a row, says Bad A Buckeye. It might even be 4 years in a row because I'm thinking it's going to be Ohio State or Oregon next year. I mean, maybe Patricia could leave for the NFL, but I imagine he, with his 3-year contract, unless there's a job that really wants him, I imagine he'd stay at Ohio State, though you never know. Ohio State will have to replace their wide receivers coach and OC, but they'll get Jeremiah Smith back. They're going to get almost their entire offense back. So, yeah, I mean, there's a good chance the Big Ten goes on a pretty long streak of winning it all because their top teams are the best top teams in the sport. Someone who could break that next year, there are teams that can break it this year. Georgia can. That's basically it in terms of a team that I think has a good chance to break the Big Ten streak, would be Georgia. I also will come out and say, this is my bracket pick, I do think the team that has the best odds to win it all is Georgia. Because of the BCR factor, they're peaking at the right time, and they have the easiest draw. It's mostly the BCR and easiest draw factor. Those really play into my confidence in them. I'm not picking it, though, because Indiana analytically is better than Georgia, and I've been riding the hot hand a lot, and I just, at this point, I can't. Before I move off of thinking Indiana's the number 1 team, I need to watch some of the playoff and how the teams play in there, and then I can make adjustments. I would not be shocked if, say, Indiana faces Georgia in the national title. I end up picking Georgia. If they play Ohio State, it would take a lot for me to not pick Ohio State in the rematch because it's hard to beat a great team twice. And I know I'm doing that with Oregon, but Oregon isn't as healthy as Ohio State, and Ohio State is better than Oregon. So yeah, it is what it is. Let's get to this super chat though before we move on here, because there's still a lot more that I have to get to, and I don't want to stay on here for forever. All of these will be, yeah, I'm a little bit off my game here tonight, but it's okay. We're not going to let that stop me here. I don't want that. There, that's what I want. Yeah, we need to display this super chat because this is incredible. And again, I don't want to be here all night, but we got past the longest topics. the takeaways and the previews. Those were meant to be the longest ones. Hoosier Viking. I've never seen a super chat to a I've never sent a super chat to a sports page before, but Sam earns it. Well, thank you for the $10 super chat, Hoosier Viking. I really appreciate it. I don't think I thank you for the super chat, and hopefully you send more. But it's because of you guys that we can do this. It's because of God that I can do this. It's because of this wonderful sport and the players who play it and the coaches that coach it that do things that I could never do that we can do this. That's why. So, thank you. to this comment that says we have Ohio State's number, they can't beat Indiana. I hope that's trolling. I picked Indiana to win. I thought Indiana played better. I think Indiana actually matches up well with Ohio State, like just in general. But Ohio State could have absolutely beaten Indiana. Like, I was watching that game, and that thing was close throughout the whole thing. The only moments where it looked like maybe one team could have pulled away was Ohio State in the second quarter and Indiana in the third. Like, Indiana, at one point in the third, it looked like, okay, maybe they could take the kill shot here and go away with this one. There was also a moment, second quarter, where it looked like, okay, if Ohio State goes up 14-3, they ended up going up 10-3, they could really put this game away. So it was close. It was competitive. It was between two of the best coaching staffs, two of the best teams in America, and soon to be, as Indiana continues to have success, it'll be undisputed they have one of the best programs in America, too. It's pretty incredible what Cignetti has done. So thank you, Hoosier Viking, for the $10 super chat. I appreciate it. If any of you want anything else to say and have me respond to it, make sure to send in a super chat. I can't handle another Georgia loss, says the pissed Ohioan. That would suck. It would. But you can also win that game and win it all. I mean, this is something that was interesting about Ohio State getting the 2 seed is they went from getting potentially the easiest draw on the 3 seed to, I think, the hardest draw in the 2 seed. The only possible harder draw would be the 4 seed. From a quarterfinal standpoint, the 4 seed is the hardest draw because I think Oregon is that good. I think they're the best team by a good margin in the first round. But I think that if you're Ohio State, you would rather face Indiana. Well, I don't know about that. It's either Ohio State or Tech that gets the toughest draw, but Georgia's no matter what was the easiest. And look, if I'm an Ohio State fan, I would embrace it. Like, okay, we can beat Miami, we can beat A&M, we can beat Georgia. Like, they can win the whole thing, really. Yeah, it's PK's comment is correct. They're even teams, but Mendoza gives Indiana this edge that few other teams would have in a setting like that. That's the correct angle here. Let's continue this live show, though, and talk about some teams that I don't think anyone would want to face in the college football playoff. There are 4 teams who will beat your team to a pulp if you are not one of them and you have to face them in the college football playoff. No one wants to face these teams. Hint, most of them are teams that got first-round byes, but one of them is not. The first I want to discuss is Indiana here. What makes them so scary is that their only possible weakness is a fact of history. It's not really anything on film. It's a fact of history, and the only factual weakness I can conjure up for the Hoosiers is depth. Where if their offensive line has multiple starters down, as we saw against Penn State, it can get really shaky. But they have depth on defense. And then you look at their roster, and they've had depth emerge at receiver in Charlie Becker when Omar Cooper Jr. or Elijah Surratt have gone down. They're underrated at tight end. They had Lee Beebe Jr. early in the year, I think in game 1 or preseason, end of the year with a injury that was really sad. And their running back room hasn't missed a beat. And they have round 1, pick 1 at quarterback. They have a deep running back room with Kalen Black, Kobe Martin, and Roman Hemby. Their offensive line, I can name it for you, all 5 of their starters. I'm talking about Carter Smith, Khalil Benson, Drew Evans, Bray Lynch, and Pat Coogan. The defensive line with Mario Landino and Tyreek Tucker, Jose Wheeler, and Stephen Daly and Michael Kamara. We know about Jones and Fisher and Hardy, the linebackers, and then their defensive backs, highlighted by D'Angelo Pons, but you got Amari Farrell, Lewis Moore, Jamari Sharp in there. It's an incredible, Devin Boykin, don't forget about him. It's an incredible unit. They don't have a clear weakness. Their only weakness is if they face multiple injuries, they do not have the best depth in the playoffs, but that's not guaranteed to happen, especially with the long breaks and how this team has gotten through the year mostly healthy to this point, and now all of the games they play in will have extended days of rest between them. But they will be playing tougher competition, and that increases the probability of injuries. So we'll see how that goes. The only other possible weakness is their blue chip ratio. But they might just be so good, especially with their starting roster and with the quarterback they have, to where they might bust the blue chip ratio, and that might not be a factor for them, especially with this playoff field. Another team that is scary, that will, take their boot, their big shiny black boot with a spur, and bury that spur in the back of your head, is Georgia. Quarterback for them is a strength. I can't even believe I'm saying that, but Stockton is reliable enough and impactful and gutsy enough as a runner and scrambler to where he gives defenses fits, and he is a strength of their team. Their running back group, especially with Nate Frazier, they have good vision, impressive athleticism. I love their offense. Their offense, I think, is one of the most balanced and multiple in the country. It's the same thing with Indiana's. And while the defense among all these teams we'll talk about analytically is the worst by a mile, by quite a large margin, the way they've been playing in the past 4 or 5 weeks is nothing short of impressive. It is complete night and day from how they were playing in September and October. A potential strength they have that others, including Indiana, may not have, is they could have college football's number 1 roster. For much of the year, it looked like that was down to Ohio State, especially after Penn State and Clemson flopped the way they did, and after Texas flopped the way they did. But Georgia has been peaking in a way that makes me think, what if they do? And they didn't start off as hot as Ohio State, or as respected or as good, for some understandable reasons. And now with experience and reps, and with a roster that is actually younger than Ohio State's from a age standpoint, now that they've gotten a lot under their belt, maybe they're finally peaking now. And it's like the match, they were trying to strike the match against the, lighter for a long time, and then it finally, they finally struck and finally took off, and it's burning now. The only weaknesses I can think of for Georgia is their pass rush and their defensive back core. But it feels like they've been fixing these over the past few weeks. Their secondary no longer looks lost. They're great in coverage. They do a good job reading the eyes of the quarterback, staying to their man, staying to their assignment. And the pass rush came alive against, Georgia Tech, against Alabama, and against Texas. Ohio State, we were never going to not mention them here. Ohio State's scary. I know that among this group, they have the most memorable loss, and Indiana looked like the slightly better team in that game, and they made the bigger plays and had the better staff. But Ohio State could have, and this tweet for whatever reason triggered people. I wasn't discrediting Indiana for the win. I was saying Ohio State and Indiana are pretty even teams, so therefore on another day, Ohio State could have very much won that game and be 13-0 instead of 12-1. This team is scary because Bo Jackson has come on at running back and improved. He's not what Henderson was as a freshman. I don't think he ever will be what Henderson was or Judkins, but those were phenoms and aliens in their own right, and just incredible. There's a reason they're succeeding in the NFL. Jackson is very good for a freshman, and he's coming on, and I like him a lot. He was basically the only reason Ohio State had any hope of crossing 10 rushing yards. Quite literally. Like, he is good enough to get yards after contact. He has that burst. He's evolved in his shiftiness and ability to make people miss throughout the year. Don't forget about Julian Sayin either. He got rattled a bit by Indiana, but not going to lie, Fernando Mendoza did at times too. Mendoza's just more experienced, has more upside, is more of an NFL quarterback at this point, so he was better able to respond. But Sayin had some good moments in that game. Receiver, we don't even need to mention it. It's the best receiver group in America. I will say on that fact, though, it feels like it's not as deep as it was last year, and that it's more of a two-man show than the usual three-man show we're used to seeing with OSU. Like 21, 24, those were three-man show receiver rooms. It's no coincidence that those offenses, when you only look at the 24 offense in the postseason and the 21 offense, it's no coincidence those were the best, along with the 22 offense, when you had college Marvin Harrison Jr., a great Emeka Ibuka, and if it had JSN, that may have been the best, three-man receiver group that Ohio State's ever had, because look at what JSN is in the NFL. He's a freak. They have two of them this year. They have two freaks, but you'd like to have Innis play at closer to his 5-star caliber. I think that could help them, but he's still good, and it's still the best receiver room in America by a comfortable margin. It's just an asterisk that I want to put on it, because every year Ohio State's receiver room is number one in America, but not all Ohio State receiver rooms are created equal. Like, Ohio State fans will tell you that the 23 receiver room is worse than the 24 one, even though when healthy, both of those were number one in America in their given year. D-line for the Buckeyes. Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson Jr., Tywone Malone, or Edric Houston, or Will Smith Jr., and then McDonald is always in there at the nose tackle. Phenomenal group. Linebacker, it's led by Sonny Styles. Arvell Reese is a situational guy who's going to be awesome in the NFL and is awesome in college. And they got Caleb Downs, and no one else is Caleb Downs. They also might have the number one roster in America, along with Georgia. Their weakness, special teams, I think is pretty obviously a weakness for them. An offensive line against most teams isn't a weakness, but in a playoff setting against any of the teams they're going to face, it will be the weakest link on the team in terms of offense and defense, excluding special teams. And lastly, Oregon, I think, is pretty scary. Oregon, from a odds standpoint, just solely in terms of you bet 100, you make this much as the most value. I still think Georgia, out of all of these teams from a betting angle, has the most value, because if Oregon's not at full strength, they're similar to Indiana, and they don't have as good of a starting roster as Indiana, despite having similar depth limitations at different positions. If you catch what I'm saying. And it's not that Oregon isn't deep. They are. They're just not cream of the crop deep, and that often matters for winning it all if you have suffered injuries already. That just goes to show how ridiculous the standard is and how close Lanning is to it, which shows that he's elite and his program is. It's also a testament to Indiana that they have not recruited at this level, and they're amongst these teams. That's, salute to Kurt Signetti and all the teams and all the coaches and programs up here. But what Oregon has that none of these teams here do is they have a large offensive line that I think is the best when it's playing at its ceiling in run blocking. And they have a very explosive rushing attack. They have a defense that is fundamentally sound. Their secondary is better than it was last year. And Dante Moore, he isn't quite Mendoza, but when he's playing at his best, he's close. And that means they have a quarterback edge over basically everyone except for Indiana, if Dante Moore is in the right headspace. And that's something that's dangerous. They also have the best tight end group amongst this list. from a blocking and receiving standpoint with Kenyon Sadiq and Jamari Johnson. And that's phenomenal. That's a threat. It's going to help their rushing attack evolve. And they showed against Washington, too, that they can win averaging 3 yards per carry. And I didn't know if they could do that. So this is a scary team. The fact they don't get that bye and then they get James Madison means they can probably treat that as a bye and use that as another game to, A, get the juices flowing and get themselves warmed up. I don't think every team needs that, but Oregon did come out rusty in the Rose Bowl last year. Also, Ohio State was just better than them. Even if Oregon wasn't rusty, Ohio State wins that game like 9 times out of 10. But for Oregon, they get to warm up, and it's another game where they can, really get reps for their second string, and that can be valuable in the playoff if, say, another injury happens, or it's a long game and they need to rotate throughout. Indiana, Georgia, Ohio State, and Oregon, those teams I think are in their own tier relative to everyone else in the playoffs. Those teams I think are going to make up the semifinals, and I am extremely confident that it will be Oregon versus Indiana and Ohio State versus Georgia for the Peach Bowl and Fiesta Bowl, respectively. These are the scariest teams in football. I do not expect any of these teams to get beaten unless they are beaten by each other. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but these are the best teams and scariest teams in the playoffs as of right now. Moving on, we can talk about why Georgia is playing their best football. We have a Florida account making fun of Notre Dame. That's funny. Where are the crying Irish fans? Bring them to me. Oh, well, I mean, Notre Dame, it's interesting. It's interesting. So, water. It's interesting. So, I understand why Notre Dame fans are pissed. I also don't think or don't know if Marcus Freeman is the one who encouraged the bowl opt-outs. But what I will say is Kirby Smart, Steve Sarkisian, Clark Lee, Ryan Day, Dan Lanning, Kurt Signetti. Did I already mention Kirby Smart? I don't think I did. There's a lot of programs that don't do that don't opt out of a bowl game. I mean, Georgia was number 1 for the entire 2023 season. And they got knocked out of the playoffs when they lost to Alabama by a score. Like, they had more of a right to complain, I think, than Notre Dame did. And they go out and they kill Florida State in the Orange Bowl. They kill them. So I don't think that's a good sign of their culture. I really don't. I think that's kind of defeating and concerning. And the idea that, we can just, we can take our ball and we can go home is just kind of like, what? Like, are we sure about that? So that's just something that I found to be strange, I guess. Like, for a team that preaches toughness and is kind of all about showing off in a way. I mean, a lot of the top teams are, but it feels like with like the explosive offense, the defense that gets a ton of interceptions, the fact that like they've been recruiting at a higher level, they're expanding their brand and they're evolving. And I think that Freeman is doing a much better job and is a better coach than Brian Kelly was there. But opting out of that bowl game, I think, just contradicts a lot of what Notre Dame says they are. And that's sad, in my opinion. So yeah. All right. Let's move on. And actually, You know what? We're going to take a very brief break here. Just brief, like 5 minutes. Um, and we'll be right back. I just need to get some water before I continue. It's getting a little bit late. Today was pretty slow. I've been running off of low sleep. I need to wake up so we can finish out this stream in a very prompt manner. So we'll be right back. And welcome back, everyone. Thank you for the patience. Really appreciate it. Glad we were able to retain most of our viewers. I think that whole intermission thing really helps. See any comments in here? Yeah. Yeah, Gus Johnson, like, so I actually had the game on mute. I never listened to it. I just watched it because I cannot stand his commentary. Klatt's good, but Gus has become unbearable. I re-listened to the highlights, and Gus's commentary is unbearable. Like it is horrible. What do you call it? The exciting plays aren't as exciting anymore. They're not as memorable because every play is like coming up with a clever nickname about a player, like Charlie B or Tater or, like Maserati Marv. Like it's stupid. It's really, really stupid. And he has like this delayed reaction now. I hope everything's okay with him. Like it almost feels like there's a change that is due to like maybe something being wrong with him in a sense. Like cuz that's not how he used to be. So I don't exactly know what's going on there, but I hope that he's okay. We'll talk about why Georgia's playing their best football right now. Georgia is peaking at the right time. They're peaking in the month of December when the college football playoff is just around the corner. And after playing a tough schedule, they get nearly a month off of rest and preparation. And they're preparing for Ole Miss. They're preparing for Ole Miss because maybe Tulane will beat Ole Miss, but Ole Miss is going to be the team that poses a threat to them out of that first round game. The reason why Georgia's playing their best football and why they have a great, excellent shot of winning it all is their pass rush is peaking. So overall on the season, they've hit a 4.19 sack percentage. But in their past 3 games, I know that includes Charlotte, but it also includes Alabama, who was the only team to beat them. And they controlled that game, the first matchup. They've had a 6.06% sack percentage over the past 3 games, facing Georgia Tech, a wonderful college offensive line, and Alabama, who in theory has several NFL players on their offensive line and has performed admirably in terms of havoc rate, and they're a good pass blocking unit. And Georgia was able to dismantle Alabama. They were able to beat Tech in a defensive game, limited possession game, a game that honestly does favor Georgia Tech. And that defense and pass rush has come alive. And that's incredible, a testament to the coaching staff. And you're going to need it to win the national title. You can't win a national title with the pass rush that Georgia had against Ole Miss, where I remember watching them sending 5 or 6 against Ole Miss's O-line, and all of them got stopped at the line of scrimmage. I'm thinking to myself, this is Ole Miss's line of scrimmage. This is not Ohio State's. It's not Oregon's. It's not even close to Indiana's, Miami's, or your own, or let alone Alabama's. You're not going to win it all if you're playing this way. But they have come so much further since that game, since their loss to Alabama, since the near disaster against Tennessee, where they struggled to get pressure. And now they're getting home. And the defense overall looks better. The coverage is better. They are sticking to their men, to their assignments. They have live in-game coaching adjustments, as you would expect from an elite staff. And against Alabama, all of Alabama's yards, the vast majority of it was yards after catch stuff. Georgia was able to lock down the field. And with the struggles they had again with Tennessee, Alabama the first time, where Alabama was dictating the game through the air, and the game against Ole Miss, they've come a ways in coverage. And same thing with the pass rush. You need a great defense. Defense wins championships is the cliche. But it's true. You need a championship caliber defense to win a championship. You need a championship caliber offense too, but defense is more correlated with national championships just slightly than offense is. Just slightly. Though part of that is because points per game offensively has a hard time differentiating the style of offense, and there's more, I think, a diversity in styles of successful offense than styles of successful defense. But anyway, I didn't need to go on that tangent. Point being, Georgia is peaking defensively, and they are playing their best ball on defense, their most aggressive, their most fundamentally sound ball on defense that they have in all of 2025. On top of that, the offense has not dropped off. Against Georgia Tech, Gunnar Stockton struggled and the offense struggled. But we've seen before in, say, 2022 or 23 or last year where Georgia did not exactly have good games against Georgia Tech. And I think that has more to do with the rivalry game and how Georgia Tech plays in clean old-fashioned hate than anything else. After watching that game with Brent Key as Georgia Tech's head coach and Kirby Smart as Georgia's, I think that game is just always going to be competitive and always full of hate and always just high-level tension, excitement, emotions, ratcheted up to a peak. I don't think that game is ever going to be one-sided as long as those two are there, with maybe a rare exception here and there. Against Alabama, they scored 28 points. They were able to drive methodically down the field, yes, with some short fields, but they were able to put together drives nonetheless against a defense that, look, for Alabama, their defense has improved weekly. Their defense right now is at its best. Their offense has just regressed and kind of slid off a cliff here. Georgia's has not. They're the number 12 They're the number 12 offense per ESPN's efficiency and the number 15 defense per ESPN's efficiency. I also think that an outscoring DeBoer in the SEC championship game and Steve Sarkisian in the regular season, so their two most recent top 10 victories, was by a combined score of 63-17. So an average of, let me calculate this, an average of 23 points per game victory over Texas and over Alabama. That shows me Kirby still has it, where he schooled DeBoer in that one game that more than makes up for his two losses to DeBoer, his losing record against him, and he schooled Steve Sarkisian. Schooled him. And those are some of the best coaches in the business. The onside kick against Texas, the decision to go for it 4th and 1 from his own field against Alabama didn't exactly pay off, but he still made it, gutsy call, converted it. The blocked punt at the beginning of the game that really gave Georgia that momentum there. That game was really never in doubt. And it's a testament to Kirby Smart in Georgia and the culture that he's built, the staff that he's built, the type of coach that he is. With 2 top 5 wins, and by 2 top 5 wins, I don't mean that Texas is a top 5 team or Alabama's a top 5 team. I don't think they are. But Texas is top 15, if not top 10. Alabama's certainly still top 10. And Georgia killed and murdered both of them. Therefore, making it more impressive than, say, you are Texas A&M and you beat Notre Dame by 1 point. What Georgia did is more impressive than that. Or you're Miami and you beat, 6th, 5th, or top 5 power-rated Notre Dame by 3 points. What Georgia did was more impressive, for example. Georgia holds 2 of the 5 most impressive wins in America. Indiana holds another 2 over Oregon and Ohio State, who are power-rated higher than both Texas and Alabama. And that is what you need to win a national title as well. The recipe is you can beat big teams. You have beaten great teams entering the playoffs. You are, healthy enough and or deep enough to play at a high level in the playoffs. Georgia is. They have a great defense. Georgia, in recent memory, over the past month, has had a fantastic defense. And your offense can move the ball and control the game and dictate the pace. And Georgia can do that. That's why Georgia football is playing their best football right here, right now, and why they can win the national title and should expect to. And here's how Miami can bust the bracket and win it all. Not favoring them to. They're a ways below a lot of teams, but can they do it? Yes, and I'm going to lay out why they can. The Hurricanes got a new opportunity. They got a new lease on life this year by getting in the college football playoff as the 10 seed. Notre Dame being the first team out, that was because despite being power rated higher and despite being on a 10-game win streak, longer than Miami's, and having better losses than Miami with a similar power rating and similar strength of schedule, they had the head-to-head win, and that matters. They should have gotten in over Notre Dame. But it wasn't totally expected in odds, and for weeks Notre Dame was ranked ahead of them until the final selection show. So it's a new lease on life. It's a bit of a surprise, and I imagine that Miami is going to do their best to take advantage of it after missing out last year in a very painful fashion. I am not picking them to win at all. I'm not even picking them to get past the quarterfinals. I think Ohio State is a challenge. But I want to lay out why I think they can bust the bracket and win it all, because they are one of the few teams in the bracket itself that I think has at least a sliver of a chance to do it. Their defensive line play is reason number one. It's at the top of the list. So this is not an elite year for offensive line play. Whether it's because of injuries or because Penn State totally screwed the pooch, Notre Dame's O-line has not really been as consistent as expected. They've dealt with some injuries, and they're not even in the playoffs. Indiana's offensive line, when fully healthy, is wonderful, but they don't have the depth some other teams do, though it is better than last year. Ohio State's offensive line is an elite. Georgia's offensive line is like Indiana's, and they have better depth, but it's not this uber-dominant unit. There isn't really a super dominant force or even team in college football this year. Very few uber dominant positions filled with multiple aliens, or at least one alien who can take over a full game. Think Jeremiah Smith for Ohio State. Miami has that on their defensive line. They have great players, underrated depth and youth, and they have Ruben Bain Jr. They can wreck most, if not all, offensive lines they play. Now, I said can, not will, but can. And that's good enough to be a critical reason here. Ruben Bain Jr., David Blay, Ahmad Moten, Akeem Mesidor, Justin Scott, Armando Blount, and Malik Bryant. They are underrated at that position, even though I know a lot of people, obviously myself included, think they have an elite defensive line. They only allow 4.23 yards per carry. They have a 17.8% havoc rate, and Heatherman's commanding one of the best defenses in the country right now. Their offensive line is physical. So they are 11th in havoc rate allowed with a 10.3% havoc rate allowed. That means only 10.3% of Miami's offensive plays are turnovers, interceptions, or fumbles that are recovered by the opponent. I actually think forced fumbles might be included in there. And then you have passes defended, and you have tackles for loss and sacks. Beck by himself has accounted for a lot of that with some of the interceptions he's thrown. So their havoc rate that is specifically related to the offensive line might be a little bit inflated compared to other teams who maybe aren't as turnover heavy, but don't have as good offensive lines. This unit with Maigoa at tackle, Francis Maigoa, and James Brockermeyer, Inez Cooper, Matthew McCoy, Markel Bell, they don't have the same rushing attack they did last year. I don't know if they have the same running backs. I know they don't have the same quarterback when it comes to the ground game, or the same offense overall. Last year's offense was better than this year's. This year's defense is tremendously better than last year. Overall, these teams are a little bit similar. I would argue this Miami team is better suited to win it all, especially when you factor in the type of bracket they're in compared to last year's team and the type of bracket that the 2024 season had. But while their offense has been inconsistent and their rushing attack is a lot more power-based with a lack of explosives, I do think that they, with the potential they have and with how well they're playing, and I think some of the struggles on offense are relating to other things outside of them, if they can put pieces together that they've had a hard time putting together, and the great teams do this, their rushing attack could totally get turned up and have success in the playoffs. And believe me, they're going to protect Carson Beck, make sure that he can deliver throws accurately if he is able to. That's a different topic of discussion. It helps to have top-tier trench play in college football, and Miami has that. They will never not be physical with Mario Cristobal. Their receivers, they have athleticism and underrated traits and talent there. I mean, Malachi Toney is phenomenal as a true freshman. He won On3's True Freshman of the Year award for offense. CJ Daniels, Keelan Marion, Joshua Moore, Josiah Trader, Ray Joseph. It's a wide receiver room that has underrated talent, and while is not as good as last year's from a collegiate angle, is good enough to present threats against most defensive back groups they face. A lot of this offense, honestly, revolves around Carson Beck. You know, last year, the reason the offense was phenomenal was because Cam Ward was phenomenal, on top of having slightly better skill position players. This year, Beck just isn't as good as Ward, on top of the skill position players being a bit worse. But Miami is still capable there. And speaking of Carson Beck, we saw him in 2023 where he looked like a future first-round quarterback. Didn't pan out that way, but we've seen him play well before. And for much of this year in September, he was playing well. And he's been playing better recently as well. That month of October, for whatever reason, for Miami, for the defense, and for Beck himself, was rough. And I wonder if that was maybe a down spot or kind of a trough, and Miami has, after exiting that trough, sort of risen above. His upside is good enough to where he can play at a high level in the playoffs and be a reason why Miami wins games instead of a factor for why they lose them. He has moments of brilliance. There are other moments of complete and utter idiocy, but his upside certainly plays into their odds and chances at winning it all. And lastly, defense wins championships. It's a cliche, but you will hear it over and over again on this channel because it's true. They are 15th in adjusted EPA per play allowed, 6th in efficiency, and 7th in points per play allowed. That is a good enough defense to win it all. They will be tested against Texas A&M. If they beat Texas A&M, they will be tested against Ohio State. If they beat Ohio State, Georgia will test them. If they somehow beat Georgia and win it and reach the national title game, someone who faces them off against them there, either Indiana, Oregon, maybe Texas Tech, maybe Alabama, will challenge them. There's enough difference and enough diversity of teams this year to where every new game can be a challenge. But if I'm going to trust one side of Miami's team more than the other, it's going to be the defense, with Corey Heatherman leading it and Ruben Bain Jr. on that side. The secondary, not invincible, not elite, but certainly better than it was last year. The front is even better than it was last year. I cannot wait to see how this team performs against Texas A&M. I am leaning towards picking them to beat the Aggies right now. It'll be tough for them to get past Ohio State, but they're one of the few teams that has a chance to win it all outside of the big three, Indiana, Georgia, and Ohio State, and that fourth team really being Oregon is that dark horse that a lot of people are looking at. Miami has a shot with their trench play, with their defense, the physicality they have, and that, who knows, maybe Carson Beck's NFL potential reemerges in the playoffs, right place, right time, and they can really get hot and start cooking. All right. So this next opinion is going to be controversial to some people, but I'm passionate about it. So I'm excited to discuss it. So I am of the opinion that Sherrone Moore is not going to last at Michigan. Yeah, let me just let the chat soak that in for a minute. Because that is bold. And I'm a Michigan guy, as most people know. I do not think it's going to work out. I am very skeptical of Sherrone Moore. I think that Sherrone Moore has done a bad job as the Michigan head coach. I think that the teams that he has fielded are underprepared. They are inconsistent. They ride more off of emotion than stoicism and discipline and fundamental soundness and executing a great game plan and sticking to it. They're stiff. They don't adapt. This is not the Michigan that I knew with Jim Harbaugh, even before 21, 22, and 23. This is a Michigan that more resembles some of the chaotic Richard Rodriguez, Brady, I don't wear a headset because I'm an idiot, Hoke type teams. And for that reason, I think that Sherrone Moore is going to get fired by the end of 2026. He's not the coach to lead Michigan back. Michigan has wonderful investment. They have a wonderful history. They won a national title not that long ago, won the Big Ten 3 years in a row. I know it was different, and the Big Ten West, helped them. All they had to do was really get through Ohio State, and then they could win it. It's not the case anymore. But still, they are a tremendous program. They're a blue blood. They have a lot of money backing them. There's a lot of things that go their way, especially in this new era of NIL. They're actually one of the few programs, if not one of the only programs, to be recruiting at a higher level in this era than before this era began. And that includes Oregon and Texas and some of these other top programs. But unlike those teams, who clearly have some bright futures, Michigan's is very murky and questionable. So let's talk about why. Dive into some more of the reasons. So I mentioned they are more emotional in their play than they are consistent or stoic. And that comes from a bad identity. In big games, Michigan turtles up and runs the ball and doesn't let Underwood unload it. They don't help him. Underwood himself has adapted to this mindset, sadly, where against Ohio State, he was more scared than he was against USC or Oklahoma. That was the most terrified I saw him in his short career at Michigan, but still, 12 whole games. That's a bad identity. Michigan does not know who they are. They want to be something. And it's not like their culture is totally broken or that they're this horrible team. They're not. But they're not where they need to be. Michigan should be competing for the playoffs every year. Every blue blood team, except for Nebraska, and Nebraska will break this the minute they can consistently win 9 or 10 games a year. Every blue blood should expect to reach the playoffs every year, with a rare caveat that if they have a down cycle roster-wise on top of having a tough schedule at the same time, or if there's an unprecedented break between a key player and a staffer and they transfer and it wasn't something terrible the staffer did, like a bad decision, then it might be acceptable to miss. But that's not what's happened at Michigan. They've played poorly in big games. They, despite having a top 15, top 10 talent roster, they look lost and confused and like they want to be there, but they don't know how to stay there, if that makes sense. The inconsistency is painful to watch, and it all falls at the feet of the head coach. This is all Sherrone Moore's fault. This is Michigan. 8-5 last year was bad. That was a failure of a season. If Michigan just gets competent QB play and maybe one more offensive lineman out of the portal and a good receiver, they could go 8-4 or even 9-3. If they have better coaching on top of that, they were not going to win it all, but maybe they even reached the playoffs with the schedule they had last year. If they had Jim Harbaugh with that team last year, Harbaugh definitely sees what's up in the quarterback room, goes to the portal, or he stays and convinces McCarthy to come back, and he probably gets another receiver, or because, he was a good developer on his own, maybe things pan out differently roster-wise, and Michigan wins 9 games or 10 games. Last year was a warning, and we gave Sherrone Moore grace, and understandably so, because it's year one, and the offense was a mess, and Harbaugh did leave him in a rough spot. This year, you have a much easier schedule. You have a freshman phenom coming in who is the number one quarterback coming out of high school and has shown tremendous upside and has played well at times. Enough to where when he doesn't play well, it's on you. It's not because he's a bust. And the defense returned the majority of its production. They lost their most talented players, but you should reload well enough with those losses to where the returning production should at least help your defense break even. And instead, the defense regressed. And while the offense improved dramatically in efficiency, in the big games it looked more or less the same as last year. And that's very disappointing and inconsistent. This team has been up and down since day one, and they've been poorly developed. The only area where Michigan showed development throughout the year was the offensive line. And even then, it's still not one of the best O-lines in the country. It's close. Next year, it very well could be one of the best O-lines, if not maybe even the best. But that was really the only unit. And maybe a little bit of linebacker too, but D-line, inconsistent for the whole year. Secondary, inconsistent for the whole year. Receiver showed improvement throughout the year, but Andrew Marsh could also just be that good, and he just emerged throughout the season. Tight end didn't really develop. Running back, a little bit of development there for sure, but only having running back and O-line make progress and maybe linebacker and every other position is inconsistent. I know Michigan's young, but that's not good enough. The development has been poor. The coaching has been substandard. And Michigan's also been predictable. They have been. They like to run the football a lot. They love to try to switch things up in a very predictable way where they're running the ball well and you can just sense they're going to try to pass the football, and that screws up the entire drive because it's only a rare instance where they can successfully pass the ball against a good defense. And they start off games slow. Wink Martindale's awful on scripted drives, and the offense usually is bad on scripted drives too, and they use the same tactics, the same sayings, and it's not working. And I'm not saying Sherrone Moore is, I'm stumbling over my words because I was about to say, he's not the worst coach in the world or he's not the worst person, but we don't know that. And I do think he's a pretty bad coach. I have people that I trust in my circles who just straight up say, look, the guy is not to be trusted. The guy is a moron in game. I'm going to go that far, and I'm going to say that because sometimes you need the cold bucket of water dumped over you. Michigan deserves better than this, and Michigan will get better than this when they're in the coaching market in 2026. Another indictment, too, has been one thing Sherrone Moore is elite at is recruiting. Michigan has been recruiting at a very high level under him, and they've engaged in IL, they've engaged the boosters, and that's wonderful. But that only ramps up expectations, and deservingly so. And yet, they're more talented in theory than a lot of the Harbaugh teams were. Like, Harbaugh never had a quarterback like Underwood, talent-wise. And yet they're so much worse. And again, that all circles back to the CEO and the coaches. So I am going to just place my bet and place my prediction right now. Sherrone Moore is going to be fired at the end of next year. They're not making the playoffs with that schedule. Maybe if they had this year's schedule and they ran it back with next year's team, maybe they make the playoffs. But next year's schedule, you got Oklahoma at home, you have Indiana at home, Michigan State with Pat Fitzgerald, and the fact that it's a rivalry game, you can never count that out. They get Ohio State on the road, they get Oregon on the road, they got to play Iowa at home. Michigan next year can certainly go 8-4. 9-3 probably isn't getting in unless they expand the playoffs. And if they expand the playoffs to 16 and you're 9-3, that's still not good enough at Michigan. So I think Sherrone Moore is going to be fired in 2026. Regardless, I do think it's useful to talk about the staff changes that Michigan needs to make. It's not good enough to fire J.B. Brown and hire Kerry Coombs, which is a hire that I question myself. That's not good enough. I applaud the recognition that special teams was not good enough and he needed a new face. And Coombs is a good recruiter. Coombs has done a good job with secondaries and special teams before. Michigan needs more changes, though. Sherrone Moore is making a bad decision by saying right now that he's not really looking into having more staff changes or making more staff changes. Wink Martindale, for example. Talk about a tactically insane decision to not make a staff change here. Wink Martindale, with his trucker cap and with his gold chain, and yes, this isn't exactly the style I usually do, but I have been objective about my team for the whole year. This is still objective. I'm just adding a bit of my passion to it. I'm sprinkling my passion onto it, like sprinkling salt or white pepper on a really beautiful piece of chicken or on some beef. I'm adding flavor here. With his trucker cap, with his shades, with the headset down, with the serious look and you know, the informalness and the tank top, the tank top overall hoodie and the Block M, and it's so excessive for the same stuff over and over and over again, and it's tiring. He dresses and acts like he's Bryant Haynes or Matt Patricia or Jim Knowles or Tosh Lupoy or how Dan Lanning was or how Jeff Hafley was or how Jesse Minter or Mike McDonald were. And he's just not. I don't care that he was a former NFL DC. I don't care that he used to be the cream of the crop. He's bad. Michigan was outside the top 25 with one of their easiest schedules in recent memory in defensive efficiency. That's a fireable offense at Michigan. That's disgusting is what that is. So Wink has to go, and hopefully they pursue some serious candidate and make a big time move there. I wouldn't expect them to if they did move on, but it sounds like they're not going to, which just like even the objective analyst part of me is disgusted. It's not just the Michigan fan part of me. There are other questionable coaches that I'm not going to say need to be fired, but maybe you give them some help, or you see how they perform against Texas, who is the third or second best team on your schedule factoring in the regular season. Those are wide receivers coach Ron Bellamy, defensive line coach Lou Esposito, and secondary coach Lamar Morgan. Some have suggested putting Justin Tress up there, and I thought about it, and at one point I was supportive of that. But then remembering in watching Michigan and seeing how they've performed for the year and how they look and their potential, Michigan isn't poorly conditioned. But if you have, I'm not going to say their strength and conditioning is good, but I'm going to say it's serviceable. Like, they're not bringing in high schoolers and they never gain weight and they never get stronger. But their technique is off and they don't know what's going on. So certainly there are there's a plethora of questionable position coaching going on. So it's not just Wink Martindale that's the problem here. It's a lot more. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot deeper than that. Something Moore did address that's good is he wants to get Bryce Underwood a dedicated QB coach. It was Chip Lindsey managing the quarterback coach duties, but having to develop Bryce Underwood from a true freshman while calling plays for an offense that is limited is probably asking him to do too much. And with the new world where you don't have a limit on the amount of position coaches you can have, why not get a really good QB coach and let Lindsey just focus on calling his offense and calling the plays? So that's a good move, depending on who he hires as the quarterback's coach. And speaking of Moore in the offense, Moore needs to, so this is my microphone. I'm going to symbolically grab my microphone. I am Sherrone Moore. The microphone is Chip Lindsey in the offense. I imagine it sounds weird with me, grabbing the microphone and rubbing it and having my hands all over it. Now they're off, and now it is a clearer sound. It is higher quality. Take your hands off the offense. Let Chip Lindsey run what he wants to run. Because it seems very clear to me that Moore has his hands in the offense, especially in big games. And that's where the turtling up and the conservative play calling begins to take hold. And that's not good. And overall, the staff is questionable. They're far from what Michigan has had in the past. As I've said before, don't think Sharon Moore will be around here past 2026 because of the questionable staff, the questionable decisions that he has made, who he is as a coach. Again, it's not good enough to just fire J.B. Brown and replace him with Kerry Coombs. Maybe the special teams will get better because of that. But Dominic Zavada was not the problem against Ohio State. The punting was, but Zavada was good. And didn't matter because parts of the defense and offense were so poorly coached and developed that Ohio State was able to really, humiliate you and emasculate you in your own stadium. And that is a bigger issue than Zavada not being as good as he was last year. So for Michigan, you would hope that they make more changes to their staff. But with what Moore has said, I don't think that's going to happen. And that's a bad move on part of the Michigan football program. Very bad move. Very poor decision-making. Poor decision-making, I will say. Okay. Read the comments. Didn't Michigan say they weren't making any changes? Yes. Moore said they weren't making any staff changes outside of Kerry Coombs, I don't think. Will Notre Dame join the ACC Big Ten to get a better chance at CFP? We'll see. I don't know. I will tell you what conference I'd love to see them in for the entertainment of it. It wouldn't actually be the Big Ten, although that would make the most geographic sense and it would restore rivalries that I love. But I like the idea of Notre Dame being that blue blood that is unique and in their own area. If it would be must-see TV to see them join the Big 12. And then, yes, they still get a lot of those blowouts, but then they have to play the new blood in Texas Tech, or they have to play on the road at BYU and Utah. That would be some must-see TV. That would be incredible, and it would be fun. So that's just my opinion. I think Big 10 or Big 12 would be the funnest and best for the sport if Notre Dame were to join a conference. I don't know if they're going to, though. And yes, their schedule next year is pathetic, as someone mentioned in the chat. Let's talk about why Oregon is a reload program. We have some other notes to get to throughout this stream, very close to the end here, but we'll get there. Tosh Lupoy has been hired as the head coach at California, and Will Stein hired as the head coach of Kentucky. This is what happens to programs who reload and don't rebuild. Their staffers are picked off as future coaches at different schools. Their assistants and quality control coaches are picked off to be position coaches or coordinators at different schools. Oregon is now a reload program, and losing Will Stein and Tosh Lupoy to Kentucky and California show that Oregon is at the top and that Oregon is only moving in a right direction. Elite staffs constantly have turnover. And how do they respond? By promoting from within when appropriate or bringing someone from the outside when appropriate and continuing that lineage of an elite staff. And the head coach at the head of the staff, in this case Oregon's Dan Lanning, slowly builds out his coaching tree. I'm excited to see how Tosh Lupoy does at Cal, how Will Stein does at Kentucky. I think both were good hires. I think for obvious scheduling reasons, it's more likely that Lupoy is going to succeed at Cal than Stein will at Kentucky, but we'll see. Oregon has done a good job developing and evolving as a staff, as a program. I have no reason to believe why they wouldn't now that they've lost their DC and OC. to different schools as head coaches. As I mentioned earlier, Lanning is building out his coaching tree. He officially has one now. It's a good thing for Oregon, and it's not bad. As yes, maybe you lose some top recruiters or staffers and you have to figure out how to replace them, but it's also a reference to future players and guys in the transfer portal and just different coaches too, as to who the best in the business are. If I want to be a head coach, I go to Oregon and I work under Lanning, or I go to Ohio State and I work under Ryan Day. I work under Kurt Cignetti at Indiana. I work under Kirby Smart at Georgia, for example. This is a good thing that he's building on a coaching tree. It's the same thing with Hartline going to USF. Might be a little bit different because losing the greatest position coach of all time in Hartline probably has more repercussions than losing Will Stein or Tosh Lupoy, as good as they are. But I still think it can be a good thing for Brian Hartline and Ohio State and Ryan Day, as this can be a good thing for Tosh Lupoy, Will Stein, the Oregon football program, and for Dan Lanning. Oregon reloaded in 2025. That, along with these moves, shows they're at the top. So Oregon returned around 5 starters. Less than Ohio State, less than Texas, less than Georgia. And they won 11 games. And they're power rated ahead of 2 of those teams. And they're within, at least according to FPI, enough margin of error from Ohio State to where, say they win it all, and they could finish the year number 1. And there is a chance that Oregon can win the national title this year, if they're healthy and at full strength. They reloaded. They are as good as they were last year, in my opinion. There's a chance, depending on how they play in the playoffs, that they could be better. Despite losing as much as they did, being as young as they are at certain positions, it's impressive. Their scouting, their development, their coaching, it's off the charts. This is one of the top programs in football now and moving forward. To lose all of those players and to upgrade on the offensive line, quarterback, running back, to upgrade at tight end, to have higher upside at receiver when healthy, and to upgrade on the linebacker group, DB, and special teams. The only position I think they downgraded at was defensive line. That was it. But they upgraded at defensive end there, just downgraded at D tackle, I think. And their secondary and defensive backfield is so much better, to where their defense is better than it was last year. As I already mentioned, they've upgraded at different spots: running back, O-line, linebacker, DB, and special teams, and they have a lot more upside at quarterback. They can stop the run now. Last year, they really struggled at stopping the run. This year, that's one of their trademarks, is they give up about 2 to 3 yards, and then they stop you right there. Their special teams is better. Atticus Sappington's been a better kicker this year than last year. Their punting game has been very solid. Their return game has been solid. And I've seen development from certain players too, where Malik Benson came in and he wasn't super good at Florida State or Alabama, and Oregon helps develop him into a receiver that might be drafted after all. And looking forward to next year, because Oregon, they don't only have this year to win it all. They're recruiting at the level of Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, and now even Notre Dame, to a point where they'll have an opportunity to win it all every year. There won't really be a natty or bust year for Oregon because of how well they recruit. But 2026 is a big year for them because they'll return most of the team. They could bring back draft-eligible players even, with the pockets they have and the fact that I don't think a lot of Oregon's players have maximized their draft potential. They'll return most of their team, and while having a schedule with challenges, they got to play at USC and at Ohio State, for example. Once again, they should be able to win 10 games, maybe even win 11. There's a path for them to go 12-0, as there was this year and as they did last year. And they could win it all next year and be even better, or much better than they are this year. They're already at the top of the sport right now. I wanted to praise Oregon, make this segment, and talk about the coaching moves and what it means for Oregon in a positive way, because I'm high on Lanning. I'm high on his staff. I have absolute faith that they'll reload. I think that Chris Hampton will make a wonderful defensive coordinator, and they've already shown roster-wise they can reload. they've shown at different points coaching-wise, too, that they can reload. I mean, they lose Carlos Lachlan to Ohio State, and they've still been really good at running back since then. They lost their wide receivers coach to the NFL. They brought in Ross Douglas from Syracuse, and they've done an all right job developing there, I think, this year. So, they are a reload program, and I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt with their hires and with their returning production and with their team from here on out. As if I haven't been already. But I just wanted to add that extra note of like, hey, making it clear, going to give them benefit of the doubt. I might remove that from the segment when I release it on YouTube, because that might be like, what? You mean you weren't beforehand? Like, no, I was, but yeah. All right. I want to talk about why the public doubted Indiana. And I think now this is over, but I don't know if the public will be fully behind Indiana either. If they were to play Ohio State again, they probably would be behind them because they saw Indiana beat them, and the public is too reactive and has the, reaction time of a tortoise to things. But I don't know. Like, if they played Georgia and Georgia was favored, would the public be on Indiana? I don't know. I know a lot of people are picking Indiana to win it all now, which is good. And I don't think the public is totally doubting Indiana anymore. But I do want to discuss why they were doubted and what mistakes people made and what mistakes people should not make when assessing this team. Hold on, I just need to text a graphic designer. Yeah, hold on, guys. Just texting my graphic designer as for what thumbnails to make for me. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for your patience, guys. All season long, the public doubted Indiana and Curt Cignetti, picking against them when they faced Oregon, picking against them well before that when they played Illinois, and Indiana won emphatically 63-10. They picked against Indiana when they played Ohio State, and they were proven wrong every single time. You have no idea. Well, if you're an Indiana fan, you do. And if you observe different college football fan bases, you do. The amount of people that picked Illinois to beat them was insane. I could not believe the amount of people that with a straight face said Illinois will beat Indiana. It did not make any sense from an analytical standpoint, from a roster standpoint. I know not everyone has the time or the desire to research teams in depth. But I did preseason, and preseason I didn't know that Indiana would beat Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. But I knew that Indiana roster-wise was way closer to Ohio State than Illinois. Way, way, way closer. And I don't know what to tell you outside of what happened in the game. Indiana won and they dominated. Against Oregon, I got to be honest, I picked Oregon to win. At least I picked Indiana to cover, and a lot of people didn't expect that to happen. And throughout the game, it became very clear to me that not only was Indiana going to win, but Indiana was controlling Oregon. And if not for that pick six, they would have won by 17 points. They would have more than doubled up Oregon's score on the road in Autzen, in an environment where Ohio State didn't win last year, in an environment where no one had beaten Oregon since Kalen DeBoer in Washington back in 2022. And then you get to the Ohio State game. This is a game where, like Illinois, we called, where, the public and even a lot of respectable people were on Ohio State. And I respected that, unlike the Illinois stuff where I thought, guys, it's so obvious that Indiana's not just going to win, but they're going to blow Illinois out. And we were dead on. I thought that, you know what, Ohio State can win. And Ohio State, just based on the fact that they've been here before and they've won these big games before and they're on the run that they're on and they have all those aliens, they should be favored over Indiana. But I think Indiana's going to win. I'm confident they'll win enough to come out and say it, like 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 confidence, that they matched up well with Ohio State. A lot of people didn't think so. They treated that game, the Big Ten title game, as if it were a redo of last year's Indiana versus Ohio State. And that was a big, big mistake. It was a huge mistake. Because Indiana is so much better than they were last year. And Ohio State's also worse and is more limited. And it set up for a game where it was tense the whole way through. Everyone was involved. It was a perfect 10 out of 10 game from a closeness, competitiveness, from a storyline angle with ebbs and flows, with different climaxes, with different turning points. And Indiana comes out on top because they have superior trench play and because they have the quarterback edge over the Buckeyes. And for the first time since the 1960s, Indiana's won the Big Ten. And for the first time since 1944, Indiana's won an outright Big Ten title. And they have set a new school record for the third time in a year in terms of wins in a season, with setting the 11th against Purdue. Well, it's really like 53, 54 weeks, not just a year, but you get the point, about a year. 11 wins against Purdue last year, 12 against Purdue this year, 13 against Ohio State this year. What Cignetti has done with an overall record of 24-2, the potential to win more games this year and win it all this year, has been nothing short of historic and incredible for the Hoosiers. It's awesome. Having a offense and defense that are top 5 in points allowed per play and points per play. The only school, by the way, who's top 5 in both of those. And the school with the largest points per play margin in the college football playoff, ranked number 1 in FPI and rated number 1 in FPI and number 1 in efficiency, number 2 in S&P Plus, 4th in game control, and number 1 in FEI, with, according to ESPN's analytics, 5th best offense, 3rd best defense, 14th best special teams unit. This is a team that can win it all. They can bust the blue chip ratio. I'm willing to sacrifice my thought that maybe Texas Tech can do that to fully buy in on the idea that Indiana can do that. The public has doubted Indiana. I know after the Ohio State game, they're going to start to really, recede from that. You could have made the excuse that, with Oregon, they got Oregon at the right time, or Oregon has been a clunky team this year. They're not quite Ohio State with Lanning. The Illinois game was just really Illinois being overrated. After that Ohio State game and winning the Big Ten, everyone's seen enough of Indiana's success to where there will be doubters, but they're not going to be extremely overhated. And you see that even in the betting world. Your value on Indiana's ticket to win it all disappeared very early in November, if not late October. The books were on that very quickly. That's because they're smart. Even the general public now, I've realized, is turning a little bit to Indiana. I think they're still going to favor Ohio State to win it all because they saw it last year and got burned and shocked by Ohio State winning it all last year after losing their most recent game before the playoffs. I know a lot of people are high on Georgia, think Oregon and some of these other teams outside the Big Three are undervalued, but I think Indiana even could be a little bit undervalued. It feels like a lot of people don't buy into the fact that they're number 1 analytically in a lot of these categories, and they're top 2 at worst in most power ratings, and they're the most balanced team in the country. They can run inside zone, outside zone. They can run zone read and have the quarterback run it. They can pass to their tight ends with screens, their receivers with screens. They can go intermediate, they can go short, they can go deep, they can pass to the boundary, they can pass over the middle of the field. They can do anything offensively. And no one else outside of maybe Georgia, I think, is that multiple offensively in the playoffs. And Georgia does not have the upside at quarterback, or I think the upside overall on offense, that Indiana does, especially the starters. Defensively, Indiana has shown time and time again that they know how to disguise their coverage. They know how to send different pressure looks. They have wonderful defensive ends. It's not just the Michael Kamara show like it was last year. It's the Michael Kamara show, and then Stephen Daly, occasionally their blitzing linebacker, Elijah Hardy, and when healthy, Kellen Wyatt, they come off and they get pressure. They have that meta up front of being able to get pressure with their linebackers and defensive linemen and generate tons of havoc plays and TFLs and turnovers. They're wonderful. They check so many boxes for being capable of winning it all. The only reservation that they have is blue chip ratio, which Bud Elliott has said will be broken at some point. And he actually said on the Cover 3 podcast that, yeah, Indiana can win it all. Doesn't know if they will, but he said, yes, they can with what they've shown. Just look at the schedule here. Beating Iowa on the road at their own game, beating Oregon on the road, and controlling them in that second half. They held them to 3 points total in that second half with Dante Moore and that entire offense full of future NFL players. Look at how they were able to beat Ohio State. Ohio State, by the way, prefers a 13-10 game over, I think, Indiana, in my opinion, because of Ohio State's almost record-setting low pace of play. And Indiana beat them there. Indiana, relative to the talent they were facing, their defense performed just as well, if not maybe even a teensy bit better than Patricia's at Ohio State. And Patricia's a genius with a phenomenal defense. They are so multiple and so well coached, and their starters are so good. And look, against Oregon, they threw a pick six. Against Illinois, they gave up a busted coverage. Against Ohio State, they had a turnover and they missed a field goal. Like, they played a worse game against Ohio State, I think, than they played against Illinois or Oregon, and they still won it. They got held by 13, and they still won. This is a phenomenal product, a phenomenal coaching job, and a team that should have never been doubted after that Oregon win. That win told you everything you needed to know. And the Penn State game and the Iowa game were just further signifiers that no matter how close you get to beating this team, unless you have a certain DNA about you, unless you have a certain level of talent, you just can't do it. You have to cut the head off the snake to beat Indiana. And no one's done it so far. Doesn't mean they'll win it all. Doesn't mean they're a lock. They're not invincible. But the public doubted Indiana because of their blue chip ratio, because of their past history, because they don't do research, and because they fall into narratives easily. And the narrative around college football is changing. The narrative around Indiana is changing. You still might be able to get value. Not from a betting perspective, because the books are too smart from that, but from a public perception angle, or from you expecting one thing and something else happens angle. You might still be able to get ahead of the curve in saying that this team can win it all, and maybe you know what? Pick them to win it all and see how it pans out. I can say with my playoff bracket that I've picked Indiana to win it all. And it seems insane. I feel like, and it felt like for much of the year, that whoever was going to win it all was not going to go 16-0. But they're healthy. They're getting a month off. They're likely going to get an Alabama or Oklahoma team that is limited enough to where Indiana should be able to not get physically destroyed and be able to beat them at the same time. And it's such a historic story. Such a beautiful story. and the coaching job and the physicality and the talent and athleticism they showcase is only matched by a few, and in some of those areas, they're not matched by anyone in college football. So don't doubt Indiana. Do not doubt Indiana. And for next year, don't doubt USC. The Trojans have a wonderful opportunity to make the college football playoff in 2026, and not just make the playoffs and be a first round exit or a second round or quarterfinal exit or a semifinal exit. I think they might be able to win the whole thing next year based on the roster that I have seen this year and what they can/should return. So let's dive into that. Riley made progress this year. They were top 15 unanimously in power ratings. Their offense was better than it was last year. Defense was about the same, I think with a higher upside, maybe a bit of a lower floor at times. But I also think they played with Notre Dame and Oregon and Michigan and maybe you could even say Illinois when they played them. And with the injuries that happened, they played a comparable schedule to last year. Better offenses is what they faced. Travel schedule was a bit easier. It's a pretty similar schedule overall. Looking at their schedule next year, they have an open slot, so they only have 11 games scheduled. They play Fresno State, Ohio State, Oregon, Washington, Maryland at home. Notre Dame, it's scheduled to play, but the location hasn't been sorted out. I imagine it will be played in LA, but maybe I'm wrong. So that is anywhere from 5 to 6 home games, and that open slot will be made a home game. So they'll be playing 6 to 7 home games. And their road schedule, all Big Ten games, is going to be at Indiana, at Penn State, at Rutgers, at UCLA, and at Wisconsin. That could shape up to be a very tough schedule, with Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon possibly being top 10 teams, Notre Dame possibly, and probably 4 of them, if not 3 to 4, definitely will be. Penn State, if Matt Campbell makes the right decisions in transfer portal acquisitions, coaching acquisitions, and roster talent, maybe Penn State can bounce back and be a top 15, top 10 team. And traveling to Rutgers and Wisconsin just trip-wise is going to be hard. And Washington should get better. This is a tough schedule. I know. But let me sell you on the idea that despite that, USC might have something going next year. Most importantly is their good returning production. In theory, they could return around 16 starters. In theory. Let's look over their starting roster as of right now, where you think Makai Lemon and you think Jacoby Lane are gone, and maybe Jade Mayava. Tanu Kynes, he's coming back. Tobias Raymond, Kalen Miller, John Ray Reed is gone, but Killian O'Connor, their starting center for much of the year and their best, he should be back. Alane Noah, Justin Ta'anu, Lake McCree is gone. King Miller will be back. Maybe Jade Mayava could return. That is anywhere from, like, in terms of starters, I'm talking about they started at one point in the year and they've had playing time. That's anywhere from 7 to 8 starters possibly being back. 7 to 8, maybe 6 to 8. The majority of the offense will be back, especially the offensive line. There will be a lot more depth on the O-line next year than this year, I think. And you have that recruiting class coming in that's large enough to where because you have 35 commits, you're going to get a larger variation in the samples that you have, just because you have more of them. So there's going to be more of a chance that you get results that are on the bell curve, both ends of the bell curve in that class. Like, there's a higher chance USC gets a really bad bust, and a higher chance too that they have a freshman phenom that pans out. More likely the latter than the former with how they've recruited. But returning that much on offense, especially if you can bring one of the receivers back, which might be unrealistic, but maybe, just maybe, it isn't so unrealistic. I think more so for Jacoby Lane than Makai Lemon. And maybe you bring Jaden Mayava back. But if not, I trust Riley enough with quarterback to where I think Hassan Longstreet would be ready. And if not, they'd bring in a portal guy. Look on defense, though. Defensively, Devin Tompkins should be back. Jayed Abasiri should be back. Cameron Crawford should be back. Jakeem Stewart, Gus Cordova, or Gus Cordova went into the portal, but Jakeem Stewart will be back. Braylon Shelby should be back. At linebacker, Desmond Stevens II should be back. Marcellus Williams will be back at corner. Christian Pierce at free safety could return. I imagine Kamari Ramsey's coming back with the rough year he had health-wise. That's a lot of starters that you could bring back. Not saying they'll bring back all of them, because some of them have a decision to make. But I think they will bring back a good amount of those guys. They could bring back nearly all of the ones I mentioned, and that would just be such a loaded team next year. The offense is proven. So you wondered how Riley's offense would work in the Big Ten. It has had some issues, for sure. But he's fielded 3 top 10 offenses at USC. This year, and then the 2 years with Caleb Williams. Last year is the aberration. It's the exception to the rule. So his offense is proven. And that's one side of the ball, one side of the field that you can just check right off. The run game has improved. And they returned 4 to 5 offensive linemen that are currently listed as starters, factoring in Killian O'Connor. I know they've had some injuries there, but that's also created more experience for them next year to pull off of. And they've averaged 5.92 yards per carry, which is 14th. The rushing game needs to improve on the road. They will probably get Waymon Jordan back, who, now that I remember, was factored into the 16 returning starters. Jordan will return along with King Miller. That's going to be a really good 1-2 punch right there. I expect the ground game to be even better next year than it was this year, especially from a physicality angle. This year, the physicality was good. The scheme was elite. The physicality next year might be elite on top of the scheme being what it is. The defensive line, so much youth there. So many new faces. They lost a lot there from last year. And now their bodies are bigger, they're healthier, they're more talented. Stewart will be a sophomore. Crawford will be a junior. Abasiri will be a junior. And Devin Tompkins will be a redshirt senior. And I imagine they will bring players in the portal if need be. That will all help a ton. Defensive line is an area where they showed a lot of upside this year, but they were also inconsistent. I think they will be better there next year. They returned 6 out of 8, in theory, 6 out of 8 2 deep players. It's, I think, now 5 out of 8 with Cordova entering the transfer portal. Yes, it is 5 out of 8, but still, that's quite a bit when the majority of those were starting guys and they were rotating in there. And last but not least, with the addition of Tremaine Carroll and with how much they're returning on the staff for next year, they have one of the best staffs in the Big Ten and consequently one of the best staffs in America. And all of that makes this coming season a must-make-it year for USC. I know the schedule's tough, but USC is a blue blood. They have a great coaching staff. They have a talented roster. They should have a lot returning. If they make good moves in the portal and develop well, as they should, USC will be in play for not just a playoff spot next year, but possibly a national championship along with it. Okay, that was a really, really bad itch that I had. But we're over it now. So, that's good. Okay, last but not least, I want to discuss college football playoff chaos scenarios. And there actually is one more topic. It's about Nebraska's new defensive coordinator. And we'll just get through those, and then we'll see you on Wednesday. And on Thursday as well. We'll see you guys. So, yeah. Okay. We know that... Hold on. We know that Ohio State is still the odds-on favorite to win it all. We've seen Georgia win it all before. We know that Oregon fulfills the blue chip ratio and is top 4 in odds to win it all. So what are the college football playoff scenarios that feature a team that would make history and defy previous rules about who can and who can't win it all? And who are the teams that would just be so out of left field for winning it all in a realistic way that we can create some chaos scenarios that don't feature the G5 team or don't feature Ole Miss without their head coach? Ones that are semi-realistic, but very chaotic regardless. Well, I have a few, and I want to go through them very quickly. Firstly, we have a twist of the Lone Star Showdown. The Lone Star State is Texas. This is a matchup of two teams within the state of Texas, but it is not Texas versus Texas A&M. It is Texas A&M versus Texas Tech. The spread here based on FPI would be Texas Tech -4. Again, this is based on FPI. This is not hypothetical lines that books have released. Texas Tech would be favored by 4 here per FPI. What I would like in this matchup is both defensive lines against both offensive lines, where you get Cassius Howell against a Texas Tech offensive line that has really struggled at times protecting the passer and has been inconsistent, and you get a offensive line from Texas A&M that has been praised and would be the best O-line in this matchup against the best D-line in the matchup and the best D-line in America in Texas Tech. I would also get to see how Ben Roberts and Jacob Rodriguez play Marcel Reed and how that secondary for not just Texas Tech but A&M guard up against. For A&M, they'd have to guard Reggie Virgil and Coy Eakin, and for Tech, they'd have to guard Casey Conception, Terry Bussey, and Mario Craver. It would be the battle of Texas schools, also that are known for pumping money into their programs and primarily using that to get their best recruits. At least that's what the common perception is, and there is a lot of truth to that. No shame to them, though. All power to them. They have great staffs, great rosters. This is semi-realistic. Not very. It is a very, very small chance of happening, but it's more realistic than Ole Miss or any of the G5 schools or Oklahoma being featured in here. So a Lone Star Showdown with a twist. We then have Miami versus Texas Tech. The spread here would be Texas Tech -2 about per FPI. This would be the battle of D-lines galore with Miami and Reuben Bain Jr. and Texas Tech with David Bailey going up against, for both of these teams, a rushing attack that has been inconsistent throughout the year, but also shows upside, and quarterbacks who have been inconsistent. It's really the battle of inconsistent offenses with upside against defenses that have shown time and time again they're the far better side of each offense. Don't really have a name for the specific rivalry, but it would be really fascinating and interesting, and you do have that little side piece to it that these are some of the top spenders of the sport, and they're some of the most well-known teams for being big public spenders. We now have Texas A&M against Indiana. Indiana is not a chaotic scenario based on seeding or based on expectation or what the books think. They are, however, a chaotic scenario based on the fact that no team has won it all without at least 50% of their roster being made up of 4 or 5-star players before. That's the blue chip ratio rule. So that is why I included them in here. According to FPI, Indiana would be favored by 10. I think this would be a nightmare matchup for A&M. Indiana would run outside zone on them all day long. Indiana would easily get pressure on Reed, and if they held Ohio State to 10 points and just over 300 yards, they would hold A&M to around 200 yards and possibly fewer than 10 points. That'd be very hard to do, but it would be doable with that defense. And offensively, they could probably go over the top on A&M too. It'd be a bad matchup, but I would be curious to see how a defensive mastermind in Elko handles and game plans for Fernando Mendoza. I would also be curious to see what A&M's offense could do against an Indiana defense, because I think Indiana could realistically hold them to single digits, and I'd be curious to see if that's actually true. Miami against Indiana would be a little bit more intriguing because it would be more balanced in the trenches, and Miami's defense at least can hold a candle to Indiana's. I think Miami would fare better against the top teams, for example, than Texas A&M would. The FPI spread here would be Indiana -8. No, I do not think Indiana would handily beat Texas Miami or blow them out in the same way they could A&M. I do think Indiana would win, and I'd be pretty confident about it, but it would be a low-scoring, close, physical game. That's for sure. I think Miami has a really good shot of punching above their weight class. That from a recruiting angle is inappropriate to say about Indiana, but in terms of the teams that would be favored over them or power rated over them, they have a chance to punch above that with their style of play. And that would, I think, create a game very similar to either the Oregon-Indiana or the Ohio State-Indiana game where Indiana wins, but they don't win by more than probably 10 points or maybe 14 points here, because I do think Indiana is better than Miami, and I also think Oregon and Ohio State are both better than Miami. I'd be curious to see, though, if Indiana could get the same TFLs and sacks against Miami that they did Ohio State and Oregon. Also be curious to see what Reuben Bain Jr. does against Carter Smith. For the next chaos scenario, we have Alabama against Texas A&M. What I would be interested in here is, okay, how did Alabama get through that bracket? I mean, Texas A&M, yes, too, but from public perception, I would be just as curious as to how A&M got through their bracket as for Alabama. But I think for a lot of people, Alabama getting through that bracket would be really shocking with how that game against Georgia ended. And Alabama would actually be favored here per FPI by about 1.5 points. So that matchup between two conference foes that have played every single season until last year, from the time A&M joined the SEC, it'd be a bit of a reunion, and one that could be fatal to any school. A&M has struggled at times with defense in general, but with Alabama's porous run game, they might be able to really turn it up against that offense. I do not think that Alabama's defense would be a good matchup for an A&M, though, unless they were willing to run read and the offensive line came to play. The last chaos matchup is Miami against Alabama. Miami per FPI would be favored by about 0.5 point or a point here. So it could be a pick 'em. I didn't want to be boring, so I went with Miami being favored since they would be favored by a fraction of a point, and I rounded up to 1. The Crimson Tide would have a rough matchup trench-wise with Miami, but they have the better secondary, the better wide receiver core, and probably an equivalent quarterback here. Also, we know that Kalen DeBoer has handled Dan Lanning. We know that Dan Lanning's a better coach than Mario Cristobal, although maybe not by as much as some people say. So I think there would be a coaching edge to Alabama here, but being owned in the trenches would really go to Miami's benefit. And it would again be fascinating to see. So Miami and Alabama are road teams in their first round games, and somehow they match up for a national title. That would be fascinating. Again, I don't think these are realistic, but they're realistic enough to be part of the conversation. I thought this would be a fun exercise to go through and say, hey, these are some possible combinations. What do you guys think about them? Here's some brief thoughts that I have on them. Let me know which combination you think is the most likely, or if you're picking any of these combinations to happen, let me know down in the comment section below. And finally, we will talk about Nebraska hiring Bob Orich as their defensive coordinator and what I think about it. I don't have too many thoughts on it because making that jump from, G5 to freaking Nebraska is going to be pretty big. But he had a quick 1-year turnaround, and I think there's a chance for him to do big things in year 1 with the Cornhuskers. A week ago, the Cornhuskers fired John Butler, and now they have hired Bob Orich. Didn't mean to say Rob Orich. Nebraska hires Bob Orich as their next defensive coordinator for the 2026 season, a week after firing John Butler. It sounded like they were entertaining Toledo's defensive coordinator, maybe a few other defensive coordinators. They settle on the San Diego State defensive coordinator, who only allowed 0.201 points per play this year. After having one of the worst defenses in the Mountain West Conference last year, San Diego State had the best defense in the Mountain West Conference this year. Spent time with Jason Eck at Idaho, wonderful coach, now the coach at New Mexico, where he just went 9-3, improved their defense, and he improved San Diego State's defense overnight. So what do I think about this hire? I gotta be honest, I don't have a ton of thoughts here. I had a lot more thoughts on Jeep Wade because the offensive line was worse than I expected. The defense was about what I expected preseason. O-line was porous and bad. And it was probably more important to nail the O-line hire than the DC hire because O-line takes cohesion and development. DC takes a play caller. I know that, one whole set of the ball is more important than one position, but most of Nebraska's talent is collected on offense. They have some personnel issues on defense. I will say that I think Jeep Wade was a better hire for Nebraska than Bob Orich was for Nebraska, but I still think it's a good hire. Because for one, a 4-down defensive front's back. Welcome back, 4-2-5. I saw a comment that said the 3-3-5 and 4-2-5 are similar. And in a sense, there are some similarities there. Both are nickel defenses. But a 4-2-5 is usually a bigger defense. And I imagine Orich will demand bigger personnel. And they'll be searching in the portal for that. So that change, while sometimes can be symbolic, because we'll shift down our blitzing linebacker to where his hand is in the ground instead of him standing up and leaning forward as a pass rusher. Now, technically we have a defensive end instead of an outside linebacker, and now maybe we have a 4-2-5 instead of a 3-3-5. Well, I don't think that's always the case there. I don't think that Rule is just going to make cosmetic changes. If he were going to, I don't think he fires Donovan Raiola with the potential ramifications that's had and the fact he's been there for so long. And I don't even know if he fires John Butler either, who was their secondary coach last year, DC this year. And while he did not do a great job, I don't know if anyone would have done a great job for Nebraska last year or this year. Already moving on to 2026 almost. But Tony White's a good DC. This D-line was smaller than last year. Linebackers weren't as good. Secondary was better, but how much better? Was it meaningful given the schedule and given the weaknesses up front? I don't know. It was time to make a schematic change. And I would expect Nebraska to be active in the portal, get bigger bodies, retain who they think they can, and who they think can contribute. A 4-2-5 is a good move. There is not a Big Ten team, even Lincoln Riley, who's loved the 3-3-5 at Oklahoma. No. There is not a single Big Ten team that runs 3-3-5 for a reason. There is not an SEC team that runs 3-3-5. There are some SEC teams like Alabama under Saban and Georgia under Kirby have ran 3-4, but it was really like 3-4 scheme with 4-2-5 personnel, if that makes sense. And they shifted different pieces around, and they had the depth to be multiple too. Nebraska just doesn't have that. So having this as the base defense is a good move. The quick turnaround is more impressive. In 2024, San Diego State was 120th in adjusted EPA per play allowed. This year they were 5th. That's all that needs to be said. It's a clear turnaround. And the defense won San Diego State 9 games. The defense was the much stronger side of the ball this year. Defense only gave up more than 24 points twice. And they shut out California, which was impressive. And both of those defensive collapses were on the road, too. So that's a lot of good things there on Bob Orich's resume. And again, he helped Idaho improve at the FCS. He's a fast riser, a quick riser as an offensive coordinator. But more importantly than hiring him and hoping that he does better than John Butler, and I think based on coordinator experience, he will, Nebraska needs size. Even an elite defensive coordinator needs fantastic players to win. Think of why Jim Knowles didn't work out at Penn State this year. Did not have the players that Ohio State did. Penn State did not have the culture. They had a major injury to one of their best linebackers, Tony Roas, their best linebacker. And also think of Matt Patricia at Ohio State. He comes to the the Eagles, and their defense is a disaster due to multiple different things. He tries to get it fixed, and he can't, and it's not his fault. It's the fault of the GM, the head coach, the roster. You need players, and Nebraska, I'm not saying you even need great players. You just need players that aren't small. They don't get bullied off the football every time you face a Big Ten offensive line or a competent offensive line. And we also need time to see how this hire pans out because it is a risk. You're hiring from the G5, G6 to the P4. You're going from the Mountain West to the Big Ten. Nebraska's schedule is tough this coming year. And their personnel this year, and unless they use the portal next year too, is going to be substandard defensively and up front. And that is where the games are going to be won for Nebraska. And they lose some good players at secondary too. So it's going to be a real test for Bob Orich next year. Will he pass? Will he succeed? I don't know, but I do think it is an upgrade over John Butler. And because of his prior resume and history of quick turnarounds, depending on what Nebraska does in the portal, I am going to give him benefit of the doubt. And I do think you will see improvements next year compared to this year, and you will see better in-game adjustments and better play calls. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys for watching, for tuning in, for supporting. We will be back at you Wednesday and then Thursday again to talk more about the playoff games, to talk about some bowl games that I'm interested in, and also to talk about some other topics, including my grading of Matt Campbell's staff hirings at Penn State. So you all